Episode 451, Nursing the Patient Back to Health. Who told you? Bessy took a step back and lifted her head. It was Michael. He looked normal. He was wearing a black coat and had slender, long legs. Bessy thought that as Michael was dealing with the Hacker Alliance, he wouldn't pay much attention to her. After all, he said the Hacker Alliance would be undergoing a big change. Hence, she made Marvin keep this a secret. It was normal that Marvin recognized her. Who knew that Michael didn't follow his routine? Bessy lowered her head. Originally, she didn't want him to know about her relationship with the arena. However, because of her, the White family was affected that night. Andre's eye injury was partly due to him following Kenneth to look for her on the 3rd level. They even risked their lives to come back for her. Although Bessy didn't want any relationship with another man, she had to pay back Kenneth's favor. As the fight was happening too soon for him to recover, she took Andre's spot and fought in the match. She also helped Principal White demand the shares from Carlo. She didn't hold a high status in the arena. Although she had troubled Mr. Kramer for half a year, it wasn't considered much in Austria. However, she failed to hide this from Michael. This was something Bessy deeply regretted. She was thinking of how to explain this past year to him. Michael didn't ask her. He stood by the window and looked at her blankly. He then hugged her tightly and lightly touched her neck.
You've caused such a huge commotion. How can I not be aware?
Bessy hesitated as Michael arrived too unexpectedly. As she was about to explain the arena situation, someone knocked on her door. Michael released her and walked towards the door calmly. Standing outside the door were Marvin and Kenneth. Marvin was holding onto a tray and Kenneth was behind him. Michael opened the door halfway and blocked it with his body. He didn't look at Kenneth and only said to Marvin,
"Give it to me."
Marvin hurriedly gave the tray to him. Michael closed the door. Marvin called a private chef and ordered soup and other soft foods for Bessy. Michael took a look and could tell that there were some herbs in the soup. He set the soup on the table and looked at her warmly. He said lightly,
"Have some food first."
He didn't ask anything since he came in. With one hand holding on to the spoon and the other holding on to the bowl, Bessy ate a mouthful of food. "I've been boxing for a year. When my grandma got sick, I was provoked and fought with someone." Michael got his answers from Daniel and asked for some videos from Mr. Kramer. He was slightly hurt after hearing how calmly Bessy talked about this. He nodded and smiled.
"I know, Phoenix. It's impressive."
Michael reached for her backpack and pulled out a pill box. He poured out 2 pills for her. Bessy slept in Michael's arms while he was on a call with Brandon. He leaned on the bedside and tugged on the blanket.
"Mr. Hall."
Brandon did not sleep well for the past few days. He rubbed his temples and said,
"So, you are not coming back tomorrow?" "No. Something came up."
Michael replied calmly. Brandon nodded and looked out at the dark, starless sky.
"That's good. There's nothing much happening tomorrow anyway. I will groom some of the younger generations while I'm still alive."
Both were troubled by some things. They chatted for a bit before ending the call. Michael reached out and switched off the table lights. He then lowered his head and opened Twitter. At the top was Bessy. He clicked to open the messages. Their last conversation was,
"You're not even interested in this? What else are you interested in?"
"You." Michael almost lost his composure in front of Brandon due to these straightforward and irresistible words. How did Michael get here so quickly? He probably wanted to come over after seeing this message. However, he stayed for another day to take care of Brandon's injury. Michael's hand trembled. After a long while, he pressed on Christopher's icon to send him a message.
"Get in contact with 129's Lone Wolf no matter what. I want to know everything that's hidden in Fairfield's 712 case."
After sending the message, he went back to his messages. He alternated between Gerald and Scarlett's cell phone numbers. He didn't call them immediately and lowered his head to look at Bessy. As he was about to pull out his arm, she frowned. Michael locked his phone and set it gently by the bedside. He cuddled her and said softly,
"Go to sleep. I shouldn't have allowed you to come here."
In her sleep, Bessy unconsciously moved closer to him. At the same time, in Austria's filming district, after finishing his night scenes, Zeke sat in the hotel opposite Brandon's confidant, Clarence.
"Mr. Miller, I'll be straightforward with you. I came because of Tucker."
Clarence said,
"Tucker is extremely talented, and I believe that you do not want to waste his talents. Truth be told, other than your father, everyone else in the Miller family is pretty ordinary. It will be a waste of talent if Tucker continues staying there. Brandon wants to teach him, personally."
Zeke did not agree or reject what he was saying. He only replied politely,
"I will have to ask Tucker for his opinion on this."
"It's only right to consult Tucker as well." Clarence nodded while his expression remained solemn.
"Mr. Miller, I hope you will consider this as beneficial to both the Miller family and Tucker. Please give me a call after you have come to a decision."
Although Clarence knew that in the Miller family, Zeke and his assistant listened more to Bessy, he couldn't contact her. He also knew that Bessy did not pay much attention to the Miller family affairs. Clarence returned to the Hall family after talking to Zeke. It was already nighttime. Brandon wasn't at the Hacker Alliance today. The lights on the first floor were still on.
"Brandon, Lionel?"
Clarence looked at the Hall family members, feeling slightly puzzled.
"Clarence."
The eldest son looked at him excitedly.
"Come and see this. This was just published by an engineer with the World Poker Tour. Emmanuel never talked about the World Poker Tour. However, this was publicized today and we're currently doing some research on it."
Clarence walked towards the computer and looked at the screen. Hall family members were a bunch of computer freaks.
"Poppy, even the World Poker Tour didn't stop the publication of these secrets as he might escape if it interfered."
The eldest son turned to ask Brandon,
"I'm very curious about this person. I wonder what kind of person he is."
Episode 452. Dumbfounded. The Hall family's eldest son thought about it seriously. If it were him, he would definitely not reveal anything to the public. Brandon looked at him, but said nothing. He turned and gestured to Clarence to head upstairs. Clarence was worried about the problems with the Hacker Alliance. The two stopped at the study.
"Sir."
Clarence bowed. Brandon turned around and asked,
"What did Zeke say?"
Clarence reported what happened. Brandon expected Zeke's reaction. Although he valued Tucker, the person he valued the most was Bessy. Ever since the situation with Emmanuel previously, Brandon did not contact Bessy. He didn't know how to face her. He couldn't hide how proud he was that his sister had children. Brandon sent Bessy a message.
"I think you can pursue programming as you are very talented. This is a waste of your talents."
Bessy's cell phone was turned on silent by Michael. It was early morning when she received the message. She sat up and looked at the message for a long while before replying. "Thank you." Bessy knew that she couldn't hide anything about the World Poker Tour from Brandon since she saw Emmanuel at the airport. However, Emmanuel said that his father was the Hacker Alliance's chairman. Michael had some relationship with the Hacker Alliance's chairman. Bessy got off the bed while in deep thought. Michael had just taken a shower and walked out of the bathroom. His expression remained the same, with a little laziness. He leaned on the door and asked while drying his hair,
"What's the matter?"
Bessy lifted her head and put on her slippers. "I suddenly thought of my great-uncle."
"Okay, I understand."
Michael nodded. He had heard about this from her, and both of them did not mind it. "You don't understand. He's the Hacker Alliance's chairman. Bessy pushed him aside, walked to the sink and picked up her toothbrush. Michael's hands paused. He turned and looked at her through the mirror for a few seconds.
It can't be.
How many generations was she from him? Bessy raised her eyebrows while brushing her teeth.
Are you going to meet him today?
Michael took 2 steps back and gave her a back hug. He smiled while looking at her through the mirror.
He's going to retire today, but he's worried about the antisocial Black Eagle. Why don't you manage the Hacker Alliance for him?
Bessy mumbled. The Hacker Alliance should have been attacked a long time ago. Matthew wanted to stop all the violent forces in Austria. Michael expected her reaction and tightened his arms.
Are you going back today?
You finished settling your matters? Bessy asked.
I settled them yesterday.
Michael pressed his chin on her messy hair and laughed. Downstairs, Kenneth was distracted while eating breakfast. His uncle asked Marvin,
Should we send food up for Miss Miller?
Before she could reply, Kenneth glanced over his shoulder. Marvin also looked back and saw Michael and Bessy walking down the stairs. Seeing Michael, the White family members were stunned. If they remembered correctly, this was the Moss family's territory. How did Michael come here? Kenneth saw him last night and wasn't shocked. Kenneth's uncle came back to his senses and hurriedly gave up his seat for Michael. I will be heading back today. Bessy sat down and informed Kenneth and his uncle. Kenneth's hands paused. He looked at her with sparkling eyes and asked,
So fast?
Michael poured a cup of milk and gave it to Bessy. Hearing Kenneth's tone, he narrowed his eyes and looked at him. Bessy nodded. Yes. She did not explain further. Bessy could guess the reason Michael allowed her to go back so quickly. She didn't want to stay here any longer either. The meal was silent. After finishing the meal, Kenneth's uncle asked Michael,
Michael, let me talk to Mr. Carlo first.
It was dangerous here due to the bombing incident from a few nights before. Kenneth's uncle was worried about their safety and wanted some men from the Moss family to protect them. Michael had already contacted Christopher. He thanked Kenneth's uncle before rejecting his offer. Kenneth looked at him again.
Are you sure you don't need someone to go with you? It's not safe here. No need. I have some men here.
Michael replied lightly. Kenneth was not surprised. He nodded and did not say anything else. Marvin had already brought down the luggage. Kenneth had to stay to settle some matters regarding the market and could not return with them. The White family members looked at the trio as they left. Kenneth's uncle asked,
The guards didn't arrest Michael?
Kenneth did not reply while the other family members exchanged glances. More importantly, how did Michael come in so quietly? Wasn't the Moss family very powerful? They were confused. A few people rushed over to the base. The captain of the White family guards recognized Andre. He said excitedly,
Mr. Fisher.
Andre nodded and looked forward. He turned to ask the family members,
Where's Phoenix? I heard from Carlo that she left.
The captain was dumbfounded.
What? I'm talking about Miss Miller.
Andre patted his forehead regretfully.
She left?
Kenneth clenched his fists. He replied to Andre respectfully.
She is returned to Evanston. She really left.
Andre regretfully looked out the front door. Standing beside Kenneth, his uncle took a deep breath. He knew. If not for Bessy, the White family wouldn't have sat in the third row yesterday. Only she could have influenced this change. Andre frowned.
I'm a step too late.
Wait. Andre meant Phoenix was Miss Miller? The captain and his subordinates looked at each other, dumbfounded. Episode 453, Grandmother's Box. In Evanston, there was an 8-hour time difference from Austria, so it was almost 10 p.m. In a private room on the second floor of Heaven Lounge, quite a lot of people were there, and the lights were dim. Jacob, Scarlett looked at the time and said softly, "I want to go back." Jacob nodded. He came today just to introduce some of the guys to her.
"You're not used to this?" Jacob looked at her. "I won't bring you here so often next time."
Scarlett had always been a studious and obedient girl. Otherwise, Jacob wouldn't have waited so long to introduce her to his friends. If it weren't for the dim lights, Jacob wouldn't have been able to tell that Scarlett was actually very calm. There wasn't a hint of apprehension in her eyes.
"Scarlett is going back?"
Thomas was sipping his drink off to the side. He glanced over. He had always been nice to Scarlett for Bessy. Scarlett looked up quietly. The three of them were talking among themselves. The woman sitting opposite them looked up and puffed some smoke. She turned to Scarlett and said lazily, "Jacob, is this your standard? Just like that. It's my round today and it's only just started, but you guys are leaving already?" She tapped her cigarette against the ashtray.
"Yes, it's Victoria's round today. You guys should show her some respect,"
one of the buddies said. Jacob did not respond. He simply looked down at Scarlett. He was fairly certain he knew the answer. Victoria tightened her grip. Jacob was Gerald's only son, and also the most outstanding young man in Chicago. He had always been rather aloof, and even though they had interacted before, Victoria never thought that Jacob would give in to anyone. Scarlett did not give Jacob an answer. She turned to Victoria and the men around her. "What are you guys smoking?" A chuckle. But Victoria's eyes were cold. "Little girl, want to try it?" Scarlett looked up at Victoria's dark eyes but did not say a thing. She reached for her cell phone in her pocket. She was going to call the police. "What are you doing?" Victoria straightened up. Scarlett looked at her and said, matter-of-factly, "Calling the police." She was already dialing as she said it. Victoria stood upright quickly, all ready to hurl the ashtray in Scarlett's direction. "What's your problem?" She was an artist. If this got to the police, she would never be able to erase this record. She had finally escaped Bessy and Noah's grasp. Jacob glared at her with a warning and grabbed the ashtray, then tossed it aside. He then held Scarlett's hand.
"I'll take you back to school."
Scarlett was a little resistant towards him. Jacob could feel that. Thomas walked out behind him. After the conflict, the private room quietened down. Nobody wanted to make a sound. Once they were out, they headed to get the car. Only then did Jacob smile as he turned to her.
"I can't believe you thought of that."
He thought that Scarlett was scaring Victoria, but Scarlett looked up at him as he said that. She held his gaze. Jacob's smile faded slightly.
"You were being serious?"
"I've already called the police." Scarlett pursed her lips. Her expression wasn't clear in the darkness.
"I got it."
Jacob paused for a moment before nodding at her.
"I'll keep a distance from Victoria in the future. I really didn't know she was here today."
If he had known, he surely wouldn't have brought Scarlett along. With that, he gave one of the buddies in the private room a call. "Jacob, I didn't call the police because she was your ex-girlfriend." Scarlett pursed her lips.
"I know."
Jacob opened the door to the front passenger seat and let her get into the car first before he got into the driver's seat. Scarlett did not buckle her seatbelt. She turned to him and said, "It's because they're breaking the law." Jacob's cell phone was ringing in his pocket. It was probably the guys in the room. He started the car engine and said,
"They're in the wrong, but, Scarlett, it isn't a big deal."
Scarlett did not speak. They got to the Northwestern University female dormitory pretty fast. Jacob got out of his seat and was about to open the door for Scarlett, but she had already gotten out herself.
"I know you want to be a detective, but this really isn't a big deal. Scarlett, be reasonable."
Before he was done talking, she looked up and said to him, "Jacob, I'm going to my room." She then turned around and headed into the dormitory. Jacob furrowed his brows. He stood by the car and stuck a cigarette in his mouth. Many calls had come in by now, but he'd missed all of them. The last one was from Jacob's mother. Jacob picked it up this time.
"You're still with that woman?"
Jacob's mother did not sound as critical as before when she brought Scarlett up, but she still sounded cold.
"Victoria has already told me about it. Son, don't you feel that your social circle and hers are too different? You should have felt it today. In the future, The conflicts between the both of you will only get bigger. With her family background, you'll be dragged into it one day.
Mom, besides her, there's no one else, Jacob said coldly as he tossed the stick onto the ground. It was 2 a.m, not far away from the apartment next to Northwestern University, when a man with bright purple hair sat in a flashy red sports car. Robert, don't you tell me to deliver anything tomorrow. I need to sleep even if you don't. He hung up and tossed his cell phone aside. There weren't pedestrians around, just other vehicles. The car wasn't going very fast. There was a figure by the apartment. Someone was squatting by the roadside with her head buried between her knees. Screech! The car came to a stop. Samuel got out of his car. He stood before the person and furrowed his brows as he asked, "What are you doing here so late at night?" The other person did not say anything, nor did she look up. Sensing that something was wrong, Samuel squatted down beside her. "Scarlett?" It was about 8 a.m. in Evanston when Bessy reached the airport. Michael glanced at her. "To the White family first?" Bessy looked at him. We'll look for Principal White first." Michael nodded and got the driver to take them to the White household. He estimated the time Bessy would enter their home and gave Gerald a call. In the White family house, Bessy had planned to write part of the thesis for the ICNE while she was on the plane, in order to make it onto the next issue of the SCI. But Michael stopped her, so she took a nap instead. She seemed to be in good spirits. Principal White was standing in the hallway looking a little shocked. "Why are you back so early?" He knew about Bessy's talent and persuasive power. As long as she had the time to prove herself, the rest of the White family would surely approve of her. Most of the White family did not know much about what had happened over in Austria. The 1% of the Economic Center agreement hadn't been signed yet, so Uncle White was waiting for the Moss family to confirm this before giving the White family a surprise. "There's some stuff." Bessy looked at him apologetically. She knew that Principal White had been plotting things for her this whole time. Principal White shook his head. He had his hands behind his back as he stood there quietly. Bessy could tell that he had something to say, so she waited patiently and silently. After a while, he said, "Bessy, do you know about your grandfather?" Bessy looked up at Principal White with a raised brow. Something clicked in her head. No wonder Principal White trusted her so much all this time. "You know about my grandfather?" "It seems like you know about it too. He'd been forced to leave back then." Principal White looked at her. "There were a lot of forces involved. You'll know them in the time to come. I'm just telling you that with your grandfather's former students and subordinates around, Director Fielder wouldn't dare to treat you too poorly." As for the White family, Principal White could tell that Kenneth wouldn't be against Bessy either. He even allowed Bessy to head to Austria with Uncle White and the rest, even though she eventually decided to come back so soon. On that thought, Principal White couldn't help but shake his head. He had thought of bringing Kenneth and Bessy together before, but Kenneth rejected it. His students and subordinates? Bessy was a little confused. Her last memory of her grandfather was when she was still a child, but she could remember how he taught her the ropes of science experiments. She thought for a while and then shook her head. "I don't know them." Principal White hadn't known that Claudius had those students too. Claudius was researching some secret study, so even his family members had no idea who and what he had been in touch with daily, much less Principal White. "Back then, a few of them almost left the research institute to defend and protect your grandfather. If they knew that you're Mr. Wilson's descendant, they'd be so happy and comforted. Did your grandfather leave you with anything?" Claudius's descendants were no less than he was. Anyone who knew Claudius would surely be very happy to meet his descendants. Upon hearing that, Bessy pursed her lips. He did. Her grandmother had forced her to keep a little box, which she hadn't opened all this while, as well as the contact number of the Northwestern University Research Laboratories. She'd only looked them up once. Episode 454, 712's Explosion Case. She had been to Northwestern University Research Laboratory before to test the medicine that Bertha took. When Bertha passed on a while later, she had left some things behind. Anne and Susan did not want it. Andrea did not take them either. Hence, the belongings were left with her and Pete. Bessy looked at Principal White for a while and responded with, "I got it." Back then, Bertha would rather have died than stepped into Evanston. She hadn't mentioned anything about Evanston to her either.
"Since you're back in Evanston now, you have to stay close to Michael for now. Don't go anywhere without him."
Principal White glanced at the door as he asked,
"Where is he?"
"He's waiting for me outside."
"All right."
While Michael seemed to not have anything to do around Evanston, Principal White was clear that the still waters run deep. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten Michael to look out for his successor. Michael surely knew the current situation. "Teacher, I'll be heading out then," Bessy said. Principal White had nothing more to say, and so he walked her to the door. Norman was standing behind Principal White. Upon seeing her leave, he said,
"Sir."
It took a while before Principal White said,
"Back then, the patriarch of the Miller family had seemed so upright, but he was helping Claudius secretly. Look at the Miller family now. Who knows how Kenneth's trip to Austria was this time?"
Principal White looked up at the gloomy sky. Most of the other strongholds in Evanston were guessing that the White family was trying to outdo the Clark family in order to become the most powerful name in Evanston. But they didn't know that they were trying to protect themselves through their power in Austria.
"Sir, they're still waiting for you for the family meeting."
There was a family meeting in the morning. Upon hearing that Bessy was coming back, Mr. White postponed the meeting by 30 minutes. He headed to the hall. As he expected, they were still talking about Bessy.
"Sir, I already said that you can't trust an outsider to take over the research institute. People are all selfish, no matter how righteous she is. I don't believe that she can be completely unfazed by such a huge institute."
One of the stakeholders of the White family got up and said,
"It's been nearly 2 days and she's been sent back by Kenneth already."
Principal White was sitting at the head of the table and did not respond. If it wasn't because Claudius left Evanston back then, he wouldn't have had the chance to take over the research institute either.
"Sir, you have to think twice."
"Yes, sir." They took turns expressing their opinion. Norman came in holding his cell phone. He seemed to be in shock.
"Sir, Kenneth is calling."
Mr. White's hand stiffened as he turned to look at him.
"What did he say? Did they get it?"
The White family had been especially concerned with the matters in Austria in the recent 2 years. All of them suddenly turned to Norman, momentarily forgetting about Bessy. Norman paused.
"Kenneth said that Miss Miller..."
One of them slammed on the table.
"I already said she won't be of any help. She only makes things worse. No, our family isn't just going to get 1% of the market share. It's 1% of the economic centers. They called the moment they got the official signature, but you didn't pick up your phone. That's why they contacted me."
Norman hurriedly handed the cell phone to Mr. White. The rest of the White family members were slightly stunned.
1% of the economic center market share? How is this possible?
Back then it had cost the White family a lot just to get 1% of the normal share. It took them so much in order to gain the Moss family's trust. How did they suddenly obtain the economic center's share right away now? Did they get lucky? Norman took a deep breath and tried to explain.
"It seems like it's because of Miss Miller."
He went on to let them know exactly what Kenneth had told him.
"Miss Miller did not ask Mr. Carlo for any commission whatsoever. She just asked for them to give 1% of the economic center share to the White family. If it wasn't for her, we probably wouldn't even be able to get the 1% of the periphery region, much less the economic center."
With that, everyone in the hall went quiet. They knew that Norman and Kenneth couldn't possibly be lying about it. If they chose to lie, they'd only be exposed soon. The man who slammed the table and was planning to push the blame on Bessy previously went quiet. His face got a little red. Outside the White household, after Bessy went in to meet Principal White, Michael parked the car and headed out of the White family's driveway. There was a tall figure standing there.
"Mr. Grant,"
Michael greeted politely. The man turned around. He looked elegant despite being rather old. It was Gerald. Bessy addressed him as Mr. Grant, and Michael was very respectful towards him too. He looked at Michael deeply.
"Mr. Clark, you should know what I'm here for."
Michael signaled for him to stand closer to the edge.
"The 712 case had been deliberately kept a secret. We couldn't find out about it even after so long."
On that note, Michael bowed towards Gerald slightly and said,
"Mr. Grant, if you could please tell me the truth, I'd owe you a favor."
Gerald's eyes seemed distant as he heard that. He roughly knew what Michael had come for.
"I don't need a favor."
Gerald took a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket and handed one to Michael. Michael took it, and then Gerald went on to light his own cigarette.
"A few people know about this, actually. It's just that the order we received is to keep this among ourselves."
Michael did not light the cigarette. He simply listened to Gerald quietly.
712 is a major case. You should know that several people died.
Gerald took a deep breath. A cloud of smoke came up between them. Michael nodded. That was all he found. Nothing more. Gerald took a while before he went on.
"The explosion. The reactors originally came from her."
Episode 455. The Sad Truth. Once he heard that, Michael's heart shuddered as he pinched the cigarette more tightly. His eyes never left Gerald's.
"You should know that Fairfield is a research base. Professor Wilson was the last person Claudius left behind who had been studying the earlier civilizations. Back then, Officer Gomez, Scarlett's father, and I were going after a huge drug syndicate. That was how we learned about the happenings in Fairfield."
Gerald's eyes seemed rather distant as he recalled the past. He knew Scarlett's father. Back when they had been investigating Fairfield, they'd already found Bessy strange. Then, they began finding out more about Bertha. At that time, Scarlett and her brother had been held hostage by the syndicate. Gerald and the rest tracked them down, but a hacker among them meddled with the positioning system. Just as it seemed impossible to make progress, Bessy took the technician's laptop and found a way to break through the enemy's firewall. Just that, Scarlett's brother still died tragically, right before Scarlett's eyes.
"My judgment was wrong. By the time we rushed back, only Bessy and Scarlett were left."
Till today, Gerald's hands still trembled as he thought about what had happened. Self-reproach was written all over his face, mixed with some mockery.
"The drug traffickers seemed to be very impressed by Bessy and said they'd give her a chance to make a choice. She was allowed to give an answer to the options they gave. You can guess what it was about."
It was either Scarlett or Scarlett's parents. She could save one or forsake all. On the one hand was the couple who treated her like a biological daughter, while on the other hand was a childhood friend who was as close to her as a sister. Bessy's reactors hadn't been perfectly constructed then. When they exploded, Scarlett's parents were buried alive.
"By the time the men and I got there, all we saw was a chaotic scene. If I had just been a little faster. Just a little faster."
Gerald took a deep breath.
"After that, another huge explosion took place in the lab, with some nuclear materials leaked. That was when Professor Wilson couldn't go on anymore. I'm not sure if any other forces were involved in it. Scarlett's brother and her parents' funeral was handled by Bessy alone. After that day, Scarlett became a little mentally unsound. There were times she was conscious, But she'd moved into the only mental institution anyway. From then on, Bessy often skipped classes to visit her. At this point, Gerald pursed his lips. A year later, Scarlett had recovered quite well, and Bessy got her out of the institution. She then brought her to me and then disappeared. Nobody knew where she went. It was a little cold in the driveway. Michael stood rooted to the ground and didn't say a thing. His eyes were colder than usual, and the typical casual demeanor was gone. His hair was a little messy from all the wind, and his fingertips trembled as he lifted the cigarette. Gerald wasn't very detailed with his narrative. If anything, it sounded vague, but Michael could actually imagine the scene. Based on Bessy's videos, it seemed like she had been very close to the Rogers family. Given her character, she definitely wouldn't have bothered to cooperate with the Rogers family in recording a birthday video if she hadn't treated them like biological parents and siblings. What Gerald did not know was that Michael was aware of what happened after that. Scarlett was unable to get over her parents' and brother's deaths. So, how could Bessy possibly be able to, given that she had a hand in it? But she attended Bertha's funeral anyway, and also waited for Scarlett to get better over the year. It was only after she ensured that Scarlett was all right and that she had left her in safe hands did she leave for Austria alone. Daniel said she'd been beaten up. It seemed like at that point she probably wasn't looking to live anyway. She then went into boxing for a year. Michael believed that she hadn't intended to become Phoenix when she first started. She went from a level 8 arena all the way to a level 11 arena, not because she wanted to emerge victorious, but because she wanted to die in that ring. If it wasn't for Daniel receiving news of Bertha's illness, Bessy could still be living in another dimension. That was why Bertha had been so worried about her. She was afraid that when she passed on, Bessy wouldn't want to live anymore either. How old was she then? Not even 16? What had she been thinking when she picked the Rogers family? Michael felt as if he could picture how she pressed the button on the parents' side once he closed his eyes. No wonder she suddenly vanished even though they'd already made a deal to have a match. Gerald let out a long sigh. Mr. White knows about this too. After all, she didn't use her right hand anymore. She didn't even want to be involved in anything academics related. Honestly, her results used to be very good when she was younger, but she just didn't like attending classes. She, Scarlett's brother, and Luke already aimed to get into Northwestern University together a long time back. The good thing is that Scarlett never felt any hatred towards Bessy at all. Upon thinking about Scarlett, Gerald sighed again. In the mental institution. Forget it. Scarlett, who once had her carefree days playing hooky with Bessy while several older guys defended them in school, was a high-caliber student in Northwestern University's law school now. But Gerald did not feel proud. He felt bad for her. His heart ached. Scarlett never thought of getting into Northwestern University, and her results were not as good as Bessy's either. She didn't have Bessy's high IQ either. The only reason she did so well at the end was because of Luke's teachings. She went from being the last in the grade to the second in 1 year. Gerald smiled and took another puff. I can tell you now because I haven't seen Bessy this way in a long time. Miss Wilson is very good with her judgment. Thank you. Michael looked down so Gerald couldn't see his expression. He reached out and patted Michael on the shoulder. Bessy's here. Episode 456. Bessy will take care of you. Bessy surely doesn't want you to know about this. She already destroyed the relevant evidence, so don't bring it up. Gerald's expression recovered. The Fairfield explosion isn't so simple. There's a huge force behind it, but I haven't found it yet. With that, he stuck the cigarette in his mouth and walked off.
He told Michael so much because he was hoping that he could be more understanding of Bessy. But it seemed like there was no need for it, anyway. Gerald sighed. "What are you doing here?" Bessy had been thinking about Principal White's question on her way here. She raised a brow when she saw Michael standing right there. Michael still had his head hung low, so Bessy couldn't see his expression. His cell phone was ringing, but he didn't think to look at it. When Bessy got close enough, he put his arm around her waist and rested his chin on the top of her head. Instead of answering her, he asked, "You're out so soon." "Something's wrong with you, Michael." Bessy leaned against his chest and slightly furrowed her brows. She'd always been sensitive and could sense that something was a little off with Michael. Bessy reached into his pocket and took out his cell phone. "It's your dad." "I won't pick it up," Michael said quietly. His voice was a little hoarse. His reaction was odd. Bessy looked at his cell phone and did not pick it up either. "Are you and your dad all right?" "I learned he was not my biological father when I was 12. Michael said after some hesitation. Bessy was a little stunned as she looked up at him. Joshua was so nice to him, but he wasn't his biological son? Did the rest of the Clark family know that? Michael's eyes seemed slightly bloodshot. Bessy recalled what Rosemary said. He'd gone to learn about the restoration of items for the sake of one of Joshua's antiques. No wonder he'd been unwilling to take over the Clark family business. Bessy had never really looked into the Clark family. Back then, she only knew that Michael was involved in the transportation department in America. "It's all right." Bessy reached out and hugged him, then looked up and smiled. "Don't be upset. I will take care of you." Michael was taken aback. He looked down at her and couldn't help but notice her eyes. She was completely wrapped in his arms, but her proud voice was filled with gentleness. Her eyes were so beautiful that his heart shuddered for a moment. Michael's heart ached so much now. He mentioned Joshua only because he didn't want her to notice his unusual expression. Who would have known that instead of being the one to console her, he was being comforted by her instead? He looked down at her quietly for a while before cupping her face in his hands. After giving her a peck on the lips, he looked directly into her eyes and smiled. "Sure, I'll have you take care of me." They left the White household and returned to the Highline apartments. Back at the Highline apartments, Bessy changed into a pair of slippers and scrolled through Twitter. She said to Marvin, "Have a look at my suitcase first." In the suitcase was the little box that her grandma had left her. She looked at the message Luke sent. "Did Scarlett contact you?" Bessy was stunned for a moment and then replied, "No." Luke didn't reply anymore. Marvin put his gaming device down and got the key. "Miss Miller, what do you want to get this time?" He hadn't gotten over the crystal given by Daniel. "Look for my grandma stuff." Bessy glanced at her cell phone and then reached out to hook fingers with Michael as she waited for Luke's reply. The three of them walked downstairs. Marvin opened a door to his playroom and then the safe, before casually taking out Bessy's suitcase. He patted some non-existent dust away. "Miss Miller, it's all here." Bessy nodded and then squatted by her suitcase as she unzipped it. There was a pile of things inside. Bessy scanned the items inside and saw Bertha's box under a Grammy trophy. She casually placed the stack of wrapped books on the ground and put the trophy aside before finally picking up the blue box. Marvin was squatting opposite her. He had gone through Bessy's belongings multiple times already. This was just one more time. He felt that all these items must be rather valuable. He even went online to search what the Grammy trophy was about. Meanwhile, he wasn't so interested in the little old box in Bessy's hands. It wasn't as if he could find anything out about it anyway. His gaze was directed to one of the books Bessy had put aside. "Miss Miller, what's that beside you?" Marvin had seen this book before. Bessy turned to look at it. "Some comic. Do you want to read it?" Marvin nodded. Bessy handed it to him. He hurriedly took it.
It's still wrapped up.
Just rip it off, Bessy said simply. She then looked closely at the box. Bertha hadn't given her the key to it, and the lock was a little rusty too. Michael had been standing at the door just a few steps away. His arms were crossed in front of his chest as he watched Bessy, thinking of going over to help her with the box. That was when Patrick returned and called out to him,
"Michael."
He looked serious. Michael looked at him and then at Bessy, who was still studying the box. He sent Patrick a silent message with his eyes. A minute later, they were in Patrick's study. With the door ajar, Michael still had his eyes in Bessy's direction.
"Speak."
"Michael," Patrick paused for a moment.
"Your father wants to see you."
Episode 457. Omnipotence. Michael remained silent and continued staring at the door. After a long while, he turned to Patrick and quietly said,
"He wants to see me?"
In the quiet study and motionless door, Michael's words sounded a little mocking.
"Tomorrow at the corporation's headquarters."
Patrick lowered his eyes. Chuckling, Michael turned to him lightly and only casually said,
"I see."
With that, he opened the door and walked in Bessy's direction. Standing there and watching his back, Patrick couldn't help but purse his lips. In Marvin's collection room, Bessy was still studying the rusty locks. Since Bertha had left this for her, she didn't want to break it open with brute force. Unfortunately, Bertha hadn't left her the keys either. Just when she wanted to find an expert to unlock it, Michael squatted beside her.
"It needs a key?"
Yeah. Still squatting down, Bessy fiddled with the rather antique and rusty lock. "I don't know if I can open it." She was deep in thoughts when Michael reached out and took the box from her. He looked down at it and examined it.
"The spring bead is in place. It can be opened."
While talking, he told Marvin to bring the toolbox in. He took the wooden box outside, placed it on a table, and pulled out a chair to sit down. Bessy followed him and sat across from him. She propped her chin up and curiously glanced at him. "Can you open it?" She felt like she had already learned all sorts of weird skills. How could Michael know even more? Who would associate a doctor with a locksmith? James even said he was good with economics as well.
"Yeah, I studied it for a while,"
said Michael calmly as he glanced at her. When Marvin brought the toolbox in, he reached out and opened it to take out 2 paper clips. Pinching it in his slender fingers, he straightened the paper clips and bent the end into a tiny arc. Then, he took out a wrench and inserted one end into the lock cylinder. Since Bessy had never studied lock structure before, in her eyes, no locks couldn't be hammered open. She was just curious about how he was going to open it. She continued staring at him, falling deep into her thoughts. He was always lazy and sloppy in his work, seemingly able to predict everything and always unconcerned. But now, his eyes were lowered and in focus, and the sharp profile of his face was a little paled and confident. Crack! The lock opened. He casually threw the paper clips and wrench into the toolbox, then lifted his chin at Bessy and tapped his fingers on the blue box.
"Take it."
Bessy took it and opened it in front of them. A document that looked like a research report was inside, along with a piece of metal that looked dark and black. It had been placed inside for several years but wasn't at all rusty. Marvin had no idea what these were. In Chicago, Bertha and Andrea hadn't seemed like ordinary people to him, but he hadn't been able to guess what was different about them. Thus, there was no way he could tell at this time either. He just looked down at the wooden box and withdrew his gaze. He returned to his room to read the pile of books Bessy gave him. Looking down at the research document, Bessy pursed her lips. She knew this was probably what her grandpa had left behind. She turned the items over and then took out the document and a piece of metal. A slightly yellowed letter was placed at the bottom of the box. As soon as she took out the letter to read it, Michael suddenly pressed on her right hand. She looked up at him and raised an eyebrow.
Take it back to your room and read it.
Michael continued staring at the piece of metal. He was silent for a long while before finally looking up.
Your grandpa.
Really? He didn't know what words to use to describe him, but his dark eyes showed respect for the old man. Okay. Bessy didn't ask further. She closed the box with a pop. The two of them went upstairs together. Once Michael left, Patrick walked into Marvin's collection room and saw him sitting cross-legged on the floor reading comics. He calmly asked,
"Has Sherry contacted you recently?"
"No." Marvin looked up at him in surprise.
"You guys didn't let me contact her."
He had yet to figure it out. Patrick thoughtfully said,
"Yeah, you did well. Oh, by the way, brother, wait a while, I'll transfer you some money."
Marvin remembered something and took out his phone to transfer $10 million to him. Transferring money took several steps and it would probably take a few hours for the money to enter Patrick's account. But when Patrick saw the $100 million in Marvin's account, he paused and was very surprised.
"Where did you get so much money from?" "Miss Miller taught me."
Marvin lifted his chin and looked rather proud. Patrick was speechless. He stood up and left.
"I'll go to the study to handle some work."
Back upstairs, Michael glanced at Bessy and reached out to touch her cheeks.
"Don't think too much and just do whatever you want to."
He thought for a while and lowered his head.
"It's best if you follow me these days."
Bessy looked up at him. Mr. White had said this to her before, too. She nodded, originally wanting to ask Michael if he knew what was in the box, but judging from his reaction, she already guessed that he must know. She turned and walked to her room thoughtfully.
"Forget it."
Glancing at her back, Michael thought for a moment and reached out to pull her back.
"Let's go to the study and research it together."
Bertha had indeed left behind Claudius's research data. Bessy sat on the desk in the study and studied the information. It was indeed another list. Just as Mr. White said, Bertha had been Claudius's assistant. At that time, Director Fielder had called Bertha Professor Wilson at her funeral, so he clearly recognized her. Michael turned on the computer and started a video call with Christopher, who was in Austria. After the meeting, he went out again to answer his phone. Sitting on the chair, Bessy stared at Michael's back, knocking on the list left by Bertha with one hand, deep in thought. She had yet to figure out anything when her phone suddenly rang. Episode 458. You're Not Worthy of Him. Bessy looked down at the local telephone number. She didn't know who it was. Fearing that it was someone from the laboratory, she picked it up. A female voice sounded over the phone, elegant and calm.
"Miss Miller, hello, I'm Sherry."
This name was very familiar to Bessy, who had heard it often from Marvin and Harvey. It had also later on appeared frequently at 129. Even Mr. White and Jack also mentioned this name often. She had checked Sherry's data by hand before. It all seemed quite ordinary, perfect, and without any omissions. No one knew better than her that the more perfect the information, the more there was behind it. She had investigated the causes and consequences of the Miller family's decline in Evanston. The Miller family had been one of the 4 major families in Evanston back then. It seemed to be reasonable that it was later on replaced by the Flake family, but... Leaning against her chair and raising an eyebrow calmly, she asked straightforwardly, "What's the matter?"
"It's nothing much. I just wanted to meet you."
Sherry's voice still sounded very elegant.
I have something here that might be of interest to you.
Bessy looked down silently. Judging by Marvin and Rosemary's reactions, she had already guessed that Sherry had feelings for Michael. Although Bessy's emotional intelligence wasn't very high, it was so obvious that she naturally guessed it. But she was just surprised. Michael's reputation in Evanston wasn't excellent, and most of the rumors about him were that he was nothing without the Clark family. Sherry was surprisingly prestigious in Evanston, and the two of them couldn't be more polar opposites. In this case, Sherry's reaction was a little too strange. I'll check it out myself if it's of interest to me. Bessy propped her legs up in disinterest. Sherry didn't seem surprised and still continued elegantly.
What if I say it has something to do with the bombing of Fairfield's laboratory? Miss Miller, if you're interested, I'll wait for you in the Central Cafe tomorrow.
She hung up right after. In the study, Bessy narrowed her eyes slightly.
What's on your mind?
Michael entered the room. Nothing. Bessy looked up and glanced at him. Although she couldn't fully believe Sherry's words, she might really know something about the explosion in the laboratory. No matter what, she was a little interested in what Sherry had to say.
I'm going to Patrick's headquarters tomorrow.
Michael lazily leaned on the chair beside her.
Come with me if you're free.
Bessy nodded, then realized what he had said, and paused for a moment. Okay. The cafe Sherry was talking about wasn't far from Patrick's headquarters. It was on the way. A new message from Samuel popped up on her phone.
Scarlett is with me.
Bessy paused before sending a message to Luke and then asking Samuel the reason. In the Bright family's house, Scarlett was sitting on the bed in the Bright family's guest room. She had taken off her glasses and was looking a little confused at the moment. Her face was pale and drained of blood. Her face behind the glasses was clean and beautiful, and her slender neck looked a little fragile. Samuel hung up the call with Bessy before knocking on the door and entering. Usually loud and carefree, he suddenly paused when he saw her sitting on the bed. Then, he placed the tray on the bedside table and casually said,
Did you fight with the Grant guy? Just tell him clearly if you're not happy with something. Don't bottle it up inside. I don't know much about Jacob, but he seems like a good guy.
He raised his hand and was about to pat Scarlett's shoulder, but turned halfway and touched his earrings awkwardly instead.
Eat your food.
He glanced at her. Scarlett pursed her lips and looked at him. Thank you. Samuel stared at her and smiled.
No worries.
He turned and left. As soon as he closed the door and turned around, he bumped right into his mother. He jumped out of his skin.
What the heck? Mom, why are you snooping around?
Why are you so easily scared? Samuel's mother folded her arms and glanced at him with disdain. Look at you. Don't harm the little girl. Samuel was speechless. Inside, Scarlett was still holding her phone, thinking of Samuel's words. She clicked on Jacob's phone number and called him. He picked up immediately. On the other end, Jacob was extremely anxious. He immediately admitted his wrong and then explained.
Scarlett, I really have nothing to do with her. It was all rumors passed on by the high school alumni.
At that time, Jacob and Thomas had also been high-spirited, and Jacob hadn't denied the rumors. This was why they had become a pair. Scarlett remained silent for a long time and then moved her fingers. I called the police.
Let's just forget about it and pretend it never happened, okay? I was wrong.
Jacob burrowed his head in his arms.
Where are you now?
Scarlett closed her eyes. She didn't want an apology from him. She just said simply, But Jacob, they were the ones in the wrong. She hung up the phone and buried her head in her knees. Her phone rang again. She looked down and saw a phone call from Mrs. Grant. She answered the phone numbly.
Scarlett, since you said that you're going to leave my son, please don't come back and disturb him again.
Mrs. Grant's voice was condescending and a little bit sarcastic.
You should know what level you're on. You're in no way worthy of Jacob.
Episode 459. The Perfect Candidate. Hearing this, Scarlett turned to the window stiffly. She suddenly thought of something, and her eyes became cold and listless. Mrs. Grant frowned on the other end of the phone.
Why aren't you speaking?
Scarlett murmured. Unworthy indeed. After speaking, she hung up without waiting for Mrs. Grant's reply. The phone slipped from her hand and she dropped her head feebly, her eyes looking very empty. Mrs. Grant hung up. Frowning, she turned over Scarlett's last words in her mind and threw the phone onto the table. At least she's self-aware. Victoria was sitting on the sofa opposite her. Upon hearing this, she paused slightly with the teacup and turned to her with her wavy hair slipping over her shoulders. Jacob.
He hasn't been out all day and night. He's just torturing himself,
said Mrs. Grant with a sneer as she picked up the teacup.
I don't know what's so great about Scarlett. She gives me the creeps.
She was naturally happy that there was a problem between the two. Although the Grant family wasn't as prestigious in Evanston as it was in Chicago, it still held a considerable and firm foundation. Scarlett's parents were unknown, and Jacob was the only son of the Grant family. There was no way his mother would let him marry Scarlett. The two of them were talking when Gerald returned home. He was covered in frost and wasn't in a good mood after meeting Michael. Victoria immediately stood up from the sofa and respectfully greeted him. Mr. Grant. Gerald only nodded lightly at her. Seeing the shopping bags on the table, he couldn't help but press his temples.
I told you to give Scarlett something. Why didn't you?
He had caused Bessy to be misunderstood back in Chicago. Gerald couldn't personally deliver the things to Scarlett because college was much scarier than high school. Mrs. Grant glanced mockingly at the shopping bags.
Gerald, you want me to clean up after you?
She sounded very critical. Gerald had always concealed Scarlett's situation from her, making her suspect that Scarlett was his illegitimate daughter. This year, Officer Gomez and Harvey cleared up the misunderstanding. Michael had also clearly understood this matter. Gerald didn't believe that the Clark family wouldn't protect Scarlett. But now, Gerald lightly glanced at his wife.
Come to my study room.
Seeing the tense atmosphere, Victoria quickly put down her teacup and left. Mrs. Grant followed her husband to his study room and stood by his table. Because Scarlett had retreated willingly, she was in a much better mood than before.
Go on. Let me see what excuses you'll come up with.
Gerald took out a pile of documents from the safe and threw them in front of her.
See for yourself.
Mrs. Grant casually flipped through the documents. She was slightly taken aback. It was a drug enforcement file. Gerald had been keeping this file. Drug Enforcement Police 0976, Benjamin Turner.
Scarlett's father is Benjamin Turner, my former subordinate.
Gerald glanced at her indifferently.
Scarlett is an orphan because of my misjudgment. Her parents and brother were murdered by the drug lords for revenge.
Then why did you tell me to treat her like my own daughter? Mrs. Grant was taken aback. She wasn't an unreasonable person, but Gerald's attitude towards Scarlett was indeed wrong, and he had always refused to explain it to her. She had always thought Scarlett was his first love's daughter.
Benjamin has a special status. Scarlett had never seen him since she was a child.
Gerald lit a cigarette.
The first time she met him was the last time she would ever see him. I want to compensate her as much as possible.
Gerald didn't say anything about the mental hospital. No matter who it was, people would think weirdly of anyone who had stayed in a mental hospital before. Other than Michael, Jared didn't intend on telling anyone else.
That...
Mrs. Grant was speechless. Gerald hadn't been very clear on his intentions and hadn't discovered Scarlett's relationship with Jacob. Now that Mrs. Grant knew the truth, her feelings inevitably became complicated. She didn't dare to tell him about Scarlett and Jacob.
"I'll look for her tomorrow."
Mrs. Grant was now feeling very confused. She left the study room and glanced at Jacob's room. After pondering for a long time, she decided not to say anything about Scarlett. She returned to her room and took out an appraisal report from her dressing table. It was Scarlett's medicine. The appraisal report was very clear. It was a neurological drug. Scarlett indeed had mental problems. Mrs. Grant put the report away. Although she now sympathized with Scarlett, she would never let Jacob marry her. Scarlett was still unworthy in terms of her background and other aspects. As for the truth, she didn't intend on telling Jacob. The next day at 8 a.m., Michael parked his car at the parking lot of the corporation, where Patrick was. Leaning over, he unfastened her seatbelt and leaned towards her.
"Go up and find a quiet lounge, okay?"
No. Bessy looked around and calmly glanced over at the cafe that Sherry told her to meet her at. "I'm going to buy a cup of coffee." Michael stared at her for a long time, but since this was his territory, he didn't feel worried. He reached out to stroke her hair.
"Okay, wait for me to come back."
5 minutes later, in the office, Michael pushed the door open. A figure stood by the office window, with his back towards the door. Raising his foot to kick the door, Michael lightly glanced at the person with both hands in his pockets. His handsome face was expressionless, but his eyebrows were a little sharp.
"You're here."
The man turned and smiled at him. The hair near his temples had turned white and his voice was very gentle.
"I haven't heard from you in so long, but you should know the reason why I'm here. If you're done playing, you should stop now. Sherry is the perfect candidate that I have personally cultivated."
Episode 460. Revealing Your Identity? Are you crazy?
"That's why you helped the Flake family?"
Michael only slightly raised his head. Upon hearing this, the man squinted at him. He paused for a moment and finally shook his head.
"You still haven't grown after all these years. I shouldn't have let the Clark family take you back then. Look at how indecisive you've become. I can't believe there hasn't been any movement after so many years. It seems like even Sherry is more important to the Clark family than you are. Have you forgotten what I've told you? Your own mother died at the hands of the Clark family."
He smirked and softly said,
"You've really disappointed me."
Upon hearing this, Michael tightened his fists in his pockets, but his dark eyes showed no obvious changes.
"If there's nothing else, I'll leave."
He turned and walked towards the door. He was about to leave when the man laughed.
"Everything you have now was given to you by me. Oh yes, you have a friend from the Hacker Alliance. He's even a relative of the woman beside you. Then you must have heard of Black Eagle, the new chairman of the Hacker Alliance. It's a pity your every move is in my hands."
Michael paused. With his back turned towards the man, his eyes turned a few notches colder, and instead of turning his head, he pulled the door open and left with an indifferent expression. After he left, the man in the office walked to the desk and sat down. A man in black walked in quietly.
"Sir."
The man bowed respectfully. Tapping his fingers on the table, the man's face that barely revealed any traces of age wasn't angry. He just leaned on his chair and said,
"Get someone to take over the affairs of Austria. As for the woman beside him,"
the man in black directly handed him a message.
"She's from the Schuler family, Brandon's grandniece, and is a hacker. It seems she's quite talented."
The man shook his head and placed the message aside.
"Since he's not obedient, don't blame me. I can put him above 10,000 other people, so naturally I can take away everything."
She was capable, but that was all. The man in black bowed again. Downstairs in the cafe, Bessy pushed the door open and saw Sherry sitting by the window. She directly went over to her. Having ordered 2 cups of iced coffee, Sherry pushed it over to her and greeted her politely. Her posture was graceful and slender. "Miss Miller." Her tone seemed to hide layers of meaning. Bessy called the waiter and ordered a cup of iced coffee. Sitting down, she turned to Sherry and narrowed her beautiful eyes before nodding at her. "Hello." Her calm attitude was beyond Sherry's expectations. Sherry gave her a second glance. "Miss Miller, you are indeed beyond my expectations." Looking at the time on her phone, Bessy interrupted her. "Miss Flake, please get straight to the point. I don't have much time. How much do you know about the bombing in Fairfield?" "Miss Miller, why are you so anxious?" Sherry stirred the iced coffee in the cup in her hand and leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Of course, you also know I'm a detective at 129 with information in my hands. I can tell you that a large number of researchers passed away because of the explosion. They all have something to do with the people around you. As for who, do I need to point them out?" She looked at her and smiled slightly. Bessy remained silent. "Hello, here is the iced coffee to go." The waiter placed a cup of iced coffee beside Bessy. Reaching out to take it, Bessy politely thanked the waiter and glanced at Sherry. She looked extremely calm and didn't seem to hesitate. "You don't believe me?" Sherry glanced at her and nodded, seemingly indifferent. "It's okay. You don't have to. I only told you what I know." Bessy took the iced coffee and her phone rang. She looked down to see that it was Michael. She picked it up and turned on the speaker. Michael's voice was indifferent as always, but laced with gentleness. He leaned against the car door and lazily smiled. "Why are you taking so long to buy a cup of iced coffee?" "I'm coming." Bessy pulled out her chair and cast a sideways glance at Sherry. "Michael, someone told me that you're related to the bombing at Fairfield." On the other end, Michael's eyes turned serious, and he stood up straight.
"Where are you? Are you okay?"
His reaction was as Bessy expected. She glanced out the window. "I'm coming, don't worry." She hung up without waiting for his reply and glanced at Sherry. Sherry was referring to Michael, but Bessy didn't believe it at all. Because Michael had gone to 129 to investigate what happened in Fairfield. However, Sherry didn't expect Bessy not to believe her in the slightest bit. She was surprised that Bessy had confessed to Michael so straightforwardly. Pursing her lips, she reached out to press her hand on the table. Staring at Bessy's back, she suddenly laughed and said ambiguously, "Fine, don't believe me. Even if he's not the direct culprit, he's still involved indirectly. Where are the souls of the 19 researchers? Do you think they're looking at you now?" Bessy didn't stop. Sherry was right. 19 people. The explosion killed 19 people and destroyed an entire base. She stuck her straw in and took a sip. Walking towards the parking lot, she immediately saw an impatient Michael.
"You met Sherry just now?"
Michael looked for her. He put his hands on her shoulder after seeing her. Usually calm and collected, Michael now looked a little anxious, and his pair of beautiful eyebrows were deeply furrowed.
"What did she tell you? Don't believe her. I'll tell you everything you want to know."
Looking up at Michael, Bessy smiled and stuck the straw into his mouth. "Take a sip and calm down." In front of Lone Wolf, did Sherry really boast about being in 129 and knowing the inside information? She must be crazy. Episode 161. Joshua is in critical condition. However, Sherry spoke for some reason. Bessy might believe it, but revealing something about 129. Bessy thought about it calmly. In the future, Sherry would find out that she was from 129. She wondered if she thought that her excuse today would be a little stupid. There was some truth in Sherry's words. Bessy would believe her, but not fully. Anyway, no matter the reason, Sherry wanted to challenge her and Michael's trust. She would have made a completely wrong move then. As for what sort of person Sherry was, Bessy lowered her head and started to think about the situation with the Miller family. The Miller family was no longer part of the 4 major families because of the Flake family. Later, because of Tucker's accident, Tanner was sent to prison. Gabriel took 18% of the equity and transferred it to Zeke. Bessy did not chase after Gabriel at the time. She didn't find any evidence of Gabriel helping Tanner. Most importantly, he had the Flake family backing him, and Bessy wouldn't dare to voluntarily look for trouble with Gabriel when Tucker was still young. After her identity of being the successor to the Research Institute was exposed, Gabriel probably developed the notion that the Miller family could temporarily regain some power. This was what he gleaned after a discussion with Zeke. But now, Bessy thoughtfully asked Michael to drink the iced coffee. I think the sudden death of my supposed grandfather is suspicious. I think so, too. Michael looked at her for a moment. He was nervous but calmed down and took the iced coffee with one hand. He placed his other arm around her shoulders. After finding out that Brandon is your uncle, I also did some investigating. Considering the Hacker Alliance's abilities, it's impossible that it did not find information about your grandma. However, no one in the Hacker Alliance found the information, so someone must be distorting the information behind the scenes. Michael hugged her and couldn't help but stare at the building with gloomy eyes. After a long while, he closed his eyes and let her go. Let's go back first. Michael drove Bessy back. A long time after the car left, Sherry came out of the cafe and stood by the intersection. She stared in the direction of Michael's car. After some time, she frowned slightly. She turned around and walked towards the building. In the building, Patrick was currently sending a business partner off. When he saw Sherry, he paused, bowed slightly, and said in a distant voice, Miss Flake. Sherry squinted at him. Patrick, are you calling me Miss Flake now? Patrick lowered his head and did not answer. Sherry retracted her gaze and walked directly to the elevator. She still did not understand. At the start, only Marvin believed in her, and she could report news about Michael whenever she liked, while the other 4 avoided her like a snake. 2 years ago, even Marvin got further and further away from her. Especially Michael. He avoided her for so many years and did not even step into the Capitol. Sherry couldn't understand why. She lowered her gaze and concealed the murderous look in her eyes. She pressed the elevator button. At the same time, Bessy returned to the Highline Apartments. When she returned home, Rosemary was sitting in the living room, as usual, chatting with Marvin. He looked rather tired. Seeing that they were back, she quickly stood up and looked at Bessy. Bessy, I haven't officially congratulated you yet, she exclaimed and talked to Bessy for some time before turning to look at Michael. Michael, what's going on? I tried to call you, but you didn't answer. Rosemary sighed slightly. Marvin brought over 2 cups of tea and handed one to each of them. Michael took the teacup casually, glanced at Rosemary, and said lightly, I didn't receive your calls. Bessy did not participate in their conversation. She only lowered her head, sent Samuel a message, and asked him about Scarlett. Too many things had happened recently. She pressed her temple. Samuel did not answer her, but called her. Bessy frowned. Michael and Rosemary were talking about something. After some thought, she decided to answer the phone. Downstairs, Rosemary looked at Michael's face and couldn't help but massage her forehead. Michael, what on earth are you thinking? I told you that Dad is critically ill and he doesn't have long to live.
Can't you go back to see him?
Michael looked out the window and acknowledged her briefly. He wanted to light a cigarette, but did not do so.
The elders of the family are electing the next heir tomorrow morning.
Rosemary laughed bitterly.
Dad is still alive, but Big Brother is anxious about being the next heir. Don't you think it's ridiculous?
When she mentioned this, she looked at him again. Michael did not respond. Rosemary did not say anything more. She stood up with her bag and seemed very angry.
Dr. Brown has already checked him. Dad doesn't have much time left. If you don't go back to visit him, it's on you.
After that, she immediately left. Marvin was initially talking to Mary's father happily, but when he overheard their conversation, he was taken aback. Finally, he glanced at Michael and realized that his expression was cold. He couldn't help but message Patrick.
Rosemary said that Joshua is about to die, but Michael doesn't want to see him. Should I persuade him?
Patrick asked him not to mingle in their affair. Inside the Clark family house, Aaron and the others were all secretly scheming to win the vote.
Captain Baldwin is not sure. The head security guard will definitely choose the illegitimate Michael.
Aaron sat in the study and spoke to his confidants.
However, that illegitimate child has no intention of being the head of the family. The probability is very high that Bessy...
Aaron frowned.
She's unpredictable.
While they were talking, someone came in to report.
Mr. Clark, Miss Flake is back. Hurry up and invite her inside.
Aaron quickly stood up. Sherry was his top advisor. Soon, Sherry entered. Aaron and his confidants stood up.
Miss Flake.
Aaron poured a cup of tea for her.
What brings you here today?
Sherry smiled. I heard the Clark family is choosing the next heir. I'm here to share some good news. With that, she took out a file from her bag. Episode 462. Paternity Test.
What's this?
Aaron was taken aback. The other heads of the Clark family also looked at the file in confusion and were unsure about what Sherry had brought over. Sherry lowered her head and took a sip of tea. Mr. Clark, take a look and it will be clear. Aaron picked up the file and opened it. This was a paternity test report. The first person was Joshua. The other person was Michael. The result was not related. Seeing the results of this report, Aaron couldn't help but pause and enter a trance because of his disbelief. After 2 seconds, he was overjoyed.
No wonder. No wonder.
Back then, he wondered why his father suddenly brought an illegitimate child. If Michael wasn't his own son, things would be easily solved. Aaron closed the file and bowed.
Miss Flake, you've really helped me a lot. I want to know what he has left after losing his status as the son of the Clark family.
I didn't do much. Sherry put down her teacup, glanced at them, and suppressed the ridicule in her eyes. I would like to congratulate you for being the next heir of the Clark family in advance. Aaron smiled proudly. In the study, the rest of the people who saw the report also breathed a sigh of relief. The next day at the Highline Apartments, Michael stood by the window downstairs and was on a call with Daniel.
Is my dad really not able to hold on much longer?
He couldn't help but purse his lips as he watched the people come and go on the streets. On the other end, Daniel put down the research in his hands and frowned.
He's been battling hard for the past few years, and he's indeed at the end of his life. He hurt his foundation sometime earlier and was able to live longer than Bessy's grandma. It will be in the next 2 days. I see.
Michael pursed his lips and hung up. Bessy went downstairs wearing a beige coat.
Where are you going?
Michael concealed his troubled expression and reached out to embrace her. He then lowered his head to look at her calmly. I'm going to the school to look for Luke first and then Samuel. Bessy looked at him sideways. Scarlett is with him.
I'm concerned about her."
Samuel was unclear over the phone. Michael nodded. He remembered Scarlett. Since Bessy mentioned her, he also became serious.
"I'll send you to the hospital with Marvin first. There's something important in the Clark family today."
Rosemary came to look for him yesterday. Bessy knew that, so she nodded. The two of them set off. Michael had never met Luke, but he had looked him up before. In the previous situation, Luke and Brian were able to protect Bessy and Scarlett very well, so they trusted their abilities. After dropping Bessy off at school, he went to the Clark family. Today, Marvin was driving as usual. Marvin glanced at the rearview mirror and did not dare to say anything. Bessy and Luke agreed to meet at Northwestern University in the mathematics department. When Bessy arrived, Luke was standing in front of the historic monument at the mathematics department. Bessy was wearing a baseball cap. Recently, a few photos of her spread on the internet. She lost her aura of intimidation, but gained a restrained vibe. So, few people were able to recognize her. However, many people were able to recognize Luke. Some girls were even discussing him excitedly. "Luke." Bessy walked to Luke's side. Luke did not say anything, but stared quietly at the glorious monument. Bessy followed his gaze. She saw Scarlett's brother in the middle. His face was sharp, cool, and charismatic, and his eyes were bright and warm. "Luke, do you know Scarlett as well?" Someone in the mathematics department recognized Luke and said excitedly, "Yes, you two go way back. You must know each other. As expected, the student gods know each other." After talking about this, the mathematics students paused and finally looked at the monument of Scarlett's brother in pity. Unfortunately, heaven is jealous of talents. Bessy did not say anything. Scarlett's brother was the same age as her, but he skipped grades in the 6th grade and won the gold medal in the IMO international competition in 3rd grade. From then on, he won 2 more gold medals in the IMO international competition during his freshman and sophomore years. The deans of the mathematics department of Northwestern University and the University of Chicago talked to him, and he transferred to Northwestern University in his 3rd year. Those under 20 could participate in the IMO competition. Scarlett's brother was the youngest to win a gold medal in the IMO competition, and once the news was out, it sent waves in the mathematics field. The people in the mathematics department had heard about the outstanding history of Scarlett's brother, Sean, from the professors who taught his classes. Bessy couldn't help but clench her fists after she heard what the people around her said. She turned to look at Luke. "Luke, let's look for Scarlett first." Luke glanced at the photo one last time and looked back in a daze. He said softly, "Let's go." The two of them left the mathematics department and went straight to Samuel. Samuel and his mother were waiting downstairs. The staff of the Bright family brought Bessy and Luke in. Samuel's mother knew that Bessy was Brandon's granddaughter. Looking at Bessy, she was a little nervous. She turned to look at Luke and was startled. Luke's name had been greatly praised in Evanston recently. Luke politely greeted Samuel and his mother.
"Bessy, you're finally here."
Samuel touched his earrings. He seemed to be in a bad mental state and glanced upstairs.
"Scarlett is in the guest room. I will take you up. She didn't let me tell you, but I thought I should. She's not in a good place."
It was inconvenient to say that over the phone as Scarlett told him to hide it from Bessy. Samuel glanced at Luke and did not recognize who this gentle and handsome man was. However, he did not think much about it. The three of them went upstairs. Samuel opened the door. The room was very dark. Scarlett was holding a book. She buried her head in her knees and continuously turned the pages. "Scarlett, what are you doing?" Bessy's expression changed as she walked over. Scarlett looked up blankly. "Detective, I want to investigate the detective." Bessy's eyes were red. She clenched her fists tightly and could almost see Scarlett's lifeless appearance in the mental hospital. After the death of her relatives, Scarlett was in a bad state. Some time ago, Scarlett's wish was to be a photographer, but after that, her only wish was to investigate the detective. However, Scarlett had already returned to normal some time ago. Bessy looked at Samuel and asked, "What happened?" Episode 463, An Incoming Storm. Samuel reached for a cigarette in his pocket. He didn't look up when Bessy asked the question.
She tells me what happened. You both can figure it out on your own.
Samuel didn't know much about Scarlett. He just knew that something seemed amiss with her that night, although she didn't want to talk about it. Bessy glanced at him. She'd gone to Austria for about half a year, and Samuel had kept an eye on Scarlett for her while she was gone. Scarlett wasn't into gaming, so she spent a lot of her time on her studies. After she returned, Samuel kept in contact with her, but he did not contact Scarlett as much anymore.
"Scarlett, Luke will take you there first,"
said Luke as he squatted beside her. Scarlett looked up and slowly focused her gaze on him. Luke did not speak anymore. He got up slowly and thanked Samuel first before taking Scarlett out. Bessy did not leave with him. When both of them had left, she turned to ask Samuel, "You really didn't manage to find out anything?" Samuel's smile was a little odd. He leaned back on the wall and said,
"I looked up a little on Jacob."
"Jacob?" Bessy recalled Scarlett mentioning him before. He was Gerald's son. Bessy trusted Gerald, so she never paid much attention to Jacob. But from what Samuel said, Bessy responded, "I got it." She followed Luke out, but Samuel grabbed her elbow.
"Her state
might not be stable." Bessy did not want to lie to him. "You know that Scarlett's condition hasn't been too stable." Bessy was worried about Scarlett and didn't stay to talk to him anymore. She quickly left. Samuel couldn't help but furrow his brows as he watched the car pull out. "Bessy left with Scarlett?" Samuel's mother came out from behind him. Samuel nodded but did not say more. Samuel's mother knew what he was thinking right away. She smiled and said, "You can continue acting." With that, Samuel's mother strutted away in her heels. Samuel turned to look at his mother in disbelief. "Oh." Samuel's mother walked to the couch and thought about something. "I heard that Joshua." Samuel went to sit by her side.
"His health is suffering. He might not be able to hold out for much longer."
"Michael is the one taking over, right?" Samuel's mother said deeply. "Otherwise, how was he going to stay in Evanston?" Rosemary had her own company and was working with the World Poker Tour now, one of the top 500 companies in the world. Aaron wasn't on good terms with Michael. If he were to take over the Clark family, Michael wouldn't have such a good time in the Clark family anymore. In fact, he might even be chased out. Even Bessy's research work at the Institute might be affected. This wasn't a good sign. Samuel's mother was worried that Evanston was going to witness a drastic turn of events. Samuel's mother noticed that Samuel was oddly calm. She raised a brow and tried to sound him out. "You don't seem the least bit worried about your buddy's future."
"I'm worried. Who says I'm not?"
Samuel glanced at Robert's message and headed out immediately. Samuel's mother received a call soon after he left. She got up from her seat in shock. "The Clark family? Joshua. All right." She hurriedly hung up and left, too. On the other side, Bessy and Luke returned to the apartment. Luke settled Scarlett down before asking her,
"What happened with Jacob?"
Scarlett only mentioned it briefly to Bessy before. Just like that, Bessy told him what she knew. If the situation had been different, Luke would definitely lose his cool. He might even look for Jacob. But upon seeing the state Scarlett was in, he simply nodded. Bessy received a message on her cell phone. She glanced at it and said, "It's Jacob's information. Luke, you should talk to him." She sent him the contact number of Jacob that she had found. Bessy then went to see Scarlett. When she left the Bright family, Scarlett seemed to already be in her past state. "Bessy." Scarlett put on her glasses and looked up from her study table when she saw Bessy enter. "I'm troubling you and Luke again." Her emotional state seemed rather inconsistent. Bessy was worried. She'd placed Scarlett under Gerald's care previously because she felt that, given her personality, it wasn't suitable for Scarlett to be with her. But now it seemed like Gerald's place wasn't suitable either. Bessy looked up. She couldn't figure out what was happening on Samuel's end. She knitted her brows together. Her cell phone rang intrusively. Scarlett turned to look out the window. She said softly, as if having to think things out, "Bessy, don't worry. I won't die before I get my license to practice law. Nothing went wrong between Jacob and me. Perhaps we're just not fit for each other." Bessy eyed her for a long while. She couldn't seem to detect anything amiss and finally nodded. "All right. Luke will be around here. I have something to attend at the Clark family." Scarlett nodded and watched Bessy leave. Then she took her cell phone out and read Mrs. Grant's message. "Let's find a time to meet." Scarlett closed her eyes for a while after reading it. When she opened her eyes, they were cold and distant again. "Sure." Bessy only received Marvin's call when she went downstairs. Luke was in the kitchen cooking breakfast for Scarlett. Upon hearing Bessy's phone ringing, he looked up with a wry smile. "The Clark boy?" He'd gone to Principal White's ceremony that day and heard them discuss Michael. Luke rubbed his temple. Both of them were in trouble. Scarlett wasn't too bad, but Bessy was simply out of control. The Clark family was evidently a very complicated group. Luke lowered the heat. "It's Marvin." Bessy did not want to look Luke in the eye. She picked up the call. She dared not even imagine the situation if Luke were to meet Michael in person. Marvin sounded rather anxious. "Miss Miller, I'm at the Clark household. Come over quick. Something's happened." Episode 464. Evanston's stability is shaken. Marvin said it was urgent, so Bessy didn't stay much longer at Luke's. She drove his car to the Clark household. Luke had no idea about it, but that was how he was slapped with 2 tickets. When Bessy arrived, Marvin was waiting for her at the entrance. "Miss Miller, hurry and follow me." Marvin took her inside right away. He hadn't told Bessy the truth over the phone, but now that she was here, he said very seriously, "Joshua can't hold it out much longer. He wants to see you one last time." Bessy snapped up and looked at him with disbelief in her eyes. A few minutes later, she arrived in Joshua's room, which was crowded with people. The young and old members of the Clark family were around. Rosemary and Michael and Aaron were inside, closest to him. Joshua's face was very pale. The last time Bessy had seen Joshua was before she left for Austria. Back then, he wasn't this haggard or frail-looking.
"Bessy's here."
Joshua seemed enthusiastic but fatigued.
"All of you, leave now. I have something to say to them privately."
Joshua pointed towards Michael and Bessy. Aaron furrowed his brows slightly, but he left the room anyway. He had his arms behind his back and didn't seem too worried. Inside the room, Joshua began to speak.
"Bessy, I have something for you,"
Joshua said as he weakly reached under his pillow. He handed a crimson pendant to her. Bessy pursed her lips and bent over as she looked at Joshua closely.
"You, both of you have to be well together. I can't help you anymore."
Joshua placed both their hands together.
"A lot is going to happen in Evanston. I will be watching you both from heaven."
Michael did not say a word. Joshua looked at him and tried his best to smile.
When did you find out?
When Patrick and the others came to find me when they were 5, I already felt that something was wrong. I got it checked when I was 12.
Michael said very calmly.
I might have guessed wrongly.
Joshua smiled while keeping his gaze on him.
Perhaps I did it wrong. You aren't actually like your dad.
Michael did not retort. He simply looked at him calmly.
When you were young, I thought of leaving you to your devices.
Joshua seemed to be talking to himself.
I let you use everything, and even gave you a credit card with no limits when you were only 6. I never turned down any of your requests. Then, I regretted it, and you probably sensed that. You stopped returning to Evanston.
When Michael was younger, Joshua didn't really care much about him. He left him in Rosemary's care. Even Aaron felt that Joshua had been too biased. Joshua had really thought of not caring about Michael initially. But back then, Michael wanted to be around him and Rosemary a lot, and that was when Joshua started to regret his decision. But at that point, Michael had already found out the truth and was getting more and more distant from him. Both parties knew about it, but none made it known.
It was also you who told Rosemary about the daylily, right?
Joshua looked at Michael.
Rosemary already told me all about it, and her company.
Joshua's body was giving out at that time. It was also Rosemary who found it at the auction to help him.
Rest well.
Michael pursed his lips as his hands stiffened.
Son, will you forgive me?
Joshua looked at him expectantly. Michael did not say a word. Joshua's eyes got a little dimmer. Just as his eyes were about to shut, Michael quietly said,
At that time, I hated myself for not being your biological son. I still do now.
He did not mention forgiveness.
All right.
Joshua was satisfied enough with this answer. He held both Michael's and Bessy's hands, and a faint warm glow returned to his pale face. He said a few more lines, and then the room went quiet. Bessy was kneeling by the bed with the pendant in her hand. After a moment of shock, she got up and went to the door. Rosemary was standing closest to the door on the outside. When she saw Bessy's expression, she asked anxiously, "How's Dad?" Bessy remained silent. Rosemary dashed in, and then her stifled sobs filled the room. Outside, the other Clark family descendants exchanged glances, but no one said another word. Joshua was an influential figure in Evanston. His passing was a big deal in the city. The stability in Evanston had been shaken with his death. Joshua's grave was on the border of Evanston. It was drizzling on the day they lowered him to the ground. Bessy was walking beside Mr. White. They were with a group of others at the foot of the hill as they watched Rosemary, Michael, and the rest walk over with the casket.
I can't believe Mr. Clark is gone, just like that.
Mr. White said quietly.
The Clark family.
He turned to Bessy.
If Michael can't take over the Clark family as the head, you and he.
Mr. White was extremely confused. Meanwhile, most of the people around, including the Flake family, Gabriel, and the White family, and some others were looking at Michael differently now. Everyone knew that he had been watched over and pampered by Joshua. Now that Joshua was gone, he would. Episode 465. Do you think I'm joking? Rosemary got out of the car and handed the urn to Michael. She looked a little tired and seemed to be in a distressed state. Dad liked you the most. Take it, she said lightly. Michael was dressed in black for the service. He bowed his head to look at the urn in Rosemary's hands. Before he was ready to accept it, Aaron, who had just gotten out of the car behind him, yelled.
He can't accept it.
Rosemary frowned. She had always been headstrong. After hearing what he had said, she immediately rebuked him.
Shut up. Now is not the time for your nonsense, nor is it the time to argue about seniority.
She only knew that Joshua would have hoped for Michael to do this. Aaron ignored her and just smiled coldly at Michael.
I'm not causing a scene. He, Michael, has never belonged to the Clark family.
He didn't wait for Rosemary's response. A group of wealthy aristocrats from the capital were gathered at the foot of the mountain. Rosemary naturally couldn't believe it and frowned.
What lies are you spouting?
Aaron took a file from his subordinate and threw it at her with a smile.
What am I saying? You can find out after taking a look at it yourself.
After that, he didn't wait for Rosemary's response. He snatched the urn from her hands and walked up the mountain. Aaron's entourage followed behind him. The head security guard and other staff members looked at each other before asking Michael.
Michael, your brother just...
Michael lowered his head. His long hair concealed his expression, and he was freezing as his entire body was wet. After a long while, he said lightly,
That's right. I don't belong to the Clark family.
After that, he stood up and walked up the mountain. Bessy followed behind him. He actually admitted it? This was explosive news to the crowd at the foot of the mountain. They all looked at one another in shock. This will be interesting.
He's not part of the Clark family, and considering the feud between him and Aaron.
Everyone was speechless. The group discussed the topic intently and stared at Michael's back strangely. In the crowd, Mr. White's brother, who had just returned from Austria, looked at Mr. White in shock.
Eric, what's going on?
Mr. White shook his head.
I'm not sure either, but judging from Aaron's attitude, I don't think it's fake.
If it were fake, Aaron wouldn't have dared to say it so openly.
Michael is in a dangerous situation now.
Norman became worried.
I originally thought that Michael could stabilize Miss Miller's position in the research institute, but now it seems difficult.
It wasn't just the White family that discussed the matter. In less than an hour, all the families in Evanston knew that Michael wasn't a biological son of the Clark family, and this topic became more popular than Joshua's death. After several hours, the funeral was completed. Joshua's tomb was covered with flowers. Almost everyone was gone. Michael continued standing in front of the tomb. Joshua's death had a great impact on Rosemary. However, she was still worried about Michael's problem and stayed alert. She handed a black silk umbrella to Bessy and said in a hoarse voice,
I'll be going back to the Clark family to settle some matters. You can stay with him here.
Rosemary glanced at Michael. She still refused to believe it. Although Michael didn't express it much, she took note of his attitude towards Joshua. She recalled how much effort he put into getting the daylily from the underground auction, including her company. Rosemary straightened her back and went down the mountain. She was going back to fight a battle with Aaron. If she lost, Michael's position in the capital seemed to be a one-sided issue. She would never allow it. Bessy watched as Rosemary went down the mountain and walked to Michael's side with the umbrella. Michael raised his head. He took the umbrella from her and stared at the tombstone for a long time before saying,
Do you know why he wanted me to forgive him?
Bessy held his other hand tightly.
My mother died in his arms.
Michael said softly.
When he was younger, he wanted to keep me out of the spotlight. I understand why now. However, if he didn't raise me, I wouldn't be here today. In reality, he has never treated me badly.
Michael faintly said. Even though he was worried, he never said anything. He knew Daniel, but he never told him. When Bessy asked him about it, he still let Daniel meet with Robert. Bessy nodded. According to what Rosemary said, Michael found out when he was about 12 years old. At the age of 12, he found out that his biological mother had died in the arms of his adoptive father. His adoptive father did not let him shine, but he treated him well. Bessy squeezed his hand and comforted him silently.
Let's go back.
Michael took one last look before taking her down the mountain. He lowered his head, glanced at Bessy, and took a deep breath. Bessy and Michael returned to the Highline apartments. Both of them were caught in the rain, so they went to their rooms to take a shower. Bessy was faster than Michael. When she went downstairs, Marvin was about to go upstairs. Seeing Bessy was coming downstairs, he quickly said,
Mr. White is here.
Mr. White and his brother were there. Mr. White's brother had great respect for Bessy. He bowed.
Miss Miller.
Mr. White. Bessy politely greeted him before looking at Elder White.
Are both of you okay?
Mr. White frowned and looked at her.
Do you want to move to the White family estate temporarily?
No need. Bessy shook her head. Mr. White was not at ease.
You should be careful of the Miller family. The Flake girl definitely made a move. I told you before that she's not simple.
They were definitely involved in the situation regarding the Clark family. Bessy nodded. I know. She seemed too indifferent, so Mr. White said solemnly,
The situation in Evanston has changed drastically, so you have to be careful. I'm not joking about Sherry.
Bessy took the teacup handed over by Marvin and placed it on the table. She smiled, but her eyes were icy. Do you think that the Clark family can be overthrown by a random person in the capital? Episode 466. Things have changed. Mr. White did not immediately respond. Since Aaron dared to talk about it at Joshua's funeral, he must have a conclusive hand. Whether it was the death of Joshua or the fact that Michael wasn't part of the Clark family, both had significant impact on Michael. The Clark family would never let an outsider be the next head of the family. The noble and respectable son had now fallen from grace. In the past, many people in the capital treated him respectfully, but now many were gloating over his misfortune and thinking of ways to step on him. Mr. White was worried about Michael's condition, as he had to deal with two very difficult things. Ordinary people would have been affected. The only one who could help out from the Miller family was Zeke, but he was filming far away in Austria. That was why Mr. White came over so quickly. As soon as the Clark family incident was revealed, the ending might not be good. The Soup family, Bright family, and other families that were connected to the Clark family would definitely break their agreements, including making Bessy the new head of the research institute. This was a risky situation. Bessy and Michael were in a very awkward place. He had never been involved in any situation in Evanston and did not have any real power. Now that a fight was about to happen, Michael would definitely not have an easy time without Joshua.
If Aaron is in power, I can't guarantee that he will spare you. He's narrow-minded and there are too many people in Evanston waiting to see you two fall,
Mr. White said thoughtfully. He was right. Besides Michael, many people in the capital were waiting for Bessy to become a joke. Bessy replied, Don't worry. She looked at the stairs. To Michael, Joshua was like her grandma to her. His name only carried weight when Joshua was around, and only then was he able to settle the Clark family affairs clearly and not be afraid of those around him. Mr. White told Bessy more about the current situation before leaving. Bessy and Marvin walked Mr. White and his brother to the elevator.
Find someone to monitor the Clark and Flake families. Bessy, also try to find out about their current situation.
Although Bessy said that they did not have to worry, Mr. White thought that she still needed some help and was not at ease. The only good thing was that Mr. White's brother and the White family were able to quickly recognize Bessy as the successor to the research institute. After all, The golden 1% of the Austria shares market was controlled by the members of the White family. Mr. White's brother said, "I'll immediately prepare for it." Mr. White didn't say anything. His face was solemn, and he was very concerned about Bessy. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Mr. White walked out and looked up at the gray sky. He was afraid that things were going to change very quickly. Upstairs, Bessy answered several calls from Luke, Brian, Mary, and Elijah. They were all asking about her current state. Bessy posted something directly to her circle of friends. Only then did the calls stop. After 2 hours, James, Jack, and the others also rushed over. "Where's Michael?" James took Marvin's tea and asked anxiously without drinking it. Ever since Tucker's incident, he had been focused on running the Miller family and the company with Jack and had an understanding of Evanston and the forces there. He knew that what happened to Michael was a huge deal. Upstairs, Bessy put down her phone and said to him before realizing how fast the news about Michael not being a biological son of the Clark family had spread. It seemed like someone was deliberately stirring things up. As Bessy spoke, Michael came downstairs. Except for a colder expression, he seemed to be the same as before. "Mr. Miller, Jack." He stood at the side as he said in a calm and clear voice, "Michael." James looked up at him and sighed. He reached out to pat Michael's shoulder. "My condolences." "Thank you, Uncle," Michael said softly. He looked a little weary and also a little startled. However, he was still strangely calm and looked like he could still analyze the current situation in the capital. He turned to look at James. "How is the Miller family?" "Michael," James said seriously, "don't worry about the Miller family affairs now. Everything is okay. If you need anything, let me know." "That's good." Michael wasn't very convinced, but he still nodded. For the first time, James did not quarrel with Bessy and Michael. He only pursed his lips and sat on the sofa. He knew in his heart that the current situation was not good. In a few hours, Michael's affairs were publicized in all their social circles. However, James and Jack still avoided Tucker. Tucker lowered his head to look at his phone, but tightened his grip. James stayed for dinner and ensured that Bessy and Michael were fine before leaving. The three of them went downstairs. Keith drove the car, Jack sat in the passenger's seat, and James and Tucker sat in the back seat. "Dad." Tucker looked at the neon lights outside the window and became determined. "I want to go to Austria." James was startled. Jack also looked at him from the rearview mirror and asked,
"Tucker, do you want to learn from your great uncle?"
The last time, Zeke conveyed Brandon's intentions, but Tucker did not respond. He only had his talent, his own self-study, and Emmanuel's occasional guidance so far. Yes, Tucker nodded firmly. He had decided this by himself. Jack and James did not doubt him. They immediately called Zeke, and after confirming it, they called Brandon. At the Evanston Financial Building, a man in a black suit was by Sherry's side. She stood at her desk and faced a middle-aged man respectfully. The middle-aged man sat by the desk and leaned back on his chair. "How are things going?" "Christopher was taken over by Sol Lambert. Alexander has been overtaken by the other parties involved. The two of them are on a plane now and will return back tomorrow morning." The man in the black suit respectfully said, "Michael's relationship with the Clark family has been publicly revealed, and many people want to bring him down. You also need to step up your actions." The middle-aged man looked at Sherry warmly. The two of them won't be able to deal with it. After a few days, they will look for me. Episode 467. The Most Mysterious Occasion. Previously, Michael had Joshua covering for him and wasn't exactly low-key. Some people in America would be afraid of his identity back then and would tolerate it, even though he only did surgery once a month. Now, smiling slightly and lighting a cigarette, the middle-aged man knew that after the release of the news, Michael would find it difficult to find anyone begging to have surgery, let alone other people. Yes, Sherry rigorously raised her hand.
What did you find in 129?
The middle-aged man turned to her. I'm stuck in the intermediate level, but, Sherry wondered aloud. The 5 senior members of 129 don't participate in such matters, other than Jared. The others are more and more mysterious. Jared used to be a member of a terrorist organization, but now he had washed his hands clean of these matters and had become a person with integrity, though that didn't mean his connections weren't there. Sherry only knew Giant Crocodile's name and had never seen him. As for the others, needless to say, she didn't know much about them.
Are you confident of winning them over?
The middle-aged man pondered for a while and looked at her. 129 was the most mysterious organization in the world. Their information network transcended all over the world. Jared had been in Japan since he was young, and Giant Crocodile on the borders. Morningbird was terrifyingly strong and focused on domestic and melee areas. Slagdragon was said to be a descendant of the foreign royal family. As for Lone Wolf, no one knew which force he belonged to. These 5 people were nothing, but it was mainly the forces behind Jared and Giant Crocodile that were enough to deter the others. No one knew how these incredibly powerful 5 people had gathered together. But because of this terrifying combination, let alone the middle-aged man, even several forces in Austria had no choice but to be subdued. Sherry shook her head. It's difficult, not to mention Morningbird and Slagdragon. Even Jared alone would be very difficult to break through. The terrorist organization in Japan was still waiting for Jared's return after all.
Then why are they stationed in Evanston? Have you found out the reason?
The middle-aged man knocked on the table. It's probably because of the crater. Sherry thought for a moment. I only have the intermediate-level access at 129, second only to the veterans. 129 has been collecting news about the crater for the last 20 years. The middle-aged man nodded.
That's not surprising. Have you found the information on the World Poker Tour?
World Poker Tour's defense system is stronger. Someone from the Sims family has already entered as an intern, but we haven't found out the specific reason. Sherry shook her head. She was obviously referring to Denora. They exchanged a few more words before Sherry left. She didn't go anywhere else. Instead, she called Denora, went to the Miller family's head and found Gabriel.
Miss Flake?
Gabriel was rather surprised. Although he had already surrendered to the Flake family, only subordinates ever came to personally find him. He didn't expect Sherry to come personally today. Sherry sat down elegantly on the left, took the teacup respectfully handed over to her by him, and then lifted her chin. Sit down.
Yes.
Gabriel sat down respectfully. You should know about the Clark family by now, said Sherry lightly. Upon hearing this, Gabriel's expression darkened and he quickly stood up.
I'm sorry to disappoint, Miss Flake.
It's okay. Now is the time for you to seize back 18% of the equity. Sherry smiled. Gabriel paused.
But the White family.
He had always been vicious with his methods, and Michael's loss of power was a sigh of relief for him. But Bessy was even the White Family Research Institute's successor, and many people had listened to her orders. Gabriel was extremely low-key now. He felt at ease as long as Bessy didn't notice him. Now that Sherry was asking him to go against her, he was naturally trying to look out for himself. The White family? Do you think it's so easy to be the new head of the Research Institute? Sherry shook her head. The White family wasn't doing charity. Bessy was such a big loophole. Why would the White family accept her so stupidly? Don't worry, the White family wouldn't dare to offend me. They won't be involved in this. Eric was no fool. He would never offend the Flake family for the Miller family, who in the center of Evanston didn't look out for themselves. You had to have the strength to even do charity. You said last time that there's a big joint venture case on the Miller family. Reaching out, Sherry introduced Denora and smiled. This is my cousin Denora. You two can discuss countermeasures. As a person with ambitions and ideals, Gabriel couldn't have climbed to this position from being a small assistant. With his courage, the backing of the Flake family, and even her cousin now, his mind was already running actively. After a long while, he nodded firmly.
Okay, Miss Flake, I'll live up to your expectations.
Smirking, Sherry lowered her head and took a sip of tea. Anne had been having a hard time these days. After switching departments, fewer people knew of her past. She knew that the Perez and Smith families had only flattered her because of her relationship with Gabriel. These people must be mocking her for losing Zeke and James, especially Bessy. Grace also became more and more dazed during this period. Anne knew her personality and knew that she would be increasingly biased against her in the future and blame her for everything. Anne's mood only slightly lifted when she heard about Michael's news. She took out her phone and smirked obscurely.
Yes, that's it. This is fitting of your identity.
Episode 468. Anne Makes a Plan. Outside, Grace had also received the same news. She entered the room with her phone.
Should I give them a call?
Grace was obviously full of regrets now. She realized that her high status in the Perez family now was because of Bessy. She didn't dare tell the Perez family that she had already lost her closeness with Bessy as mother and daughter. Why would you? Anne turned to her. She knew that she shouldn't talk to her like this, but the jealousy in her heart was eating at her, and she couldn't help but ridicule her. Do you think you can fix your relationship with her? To tell you the truth, Dad is about to fall off under pressure, and the Flake family is helping Gabriel. You can decide if you want to make this call. If anything happens, Gabriel and the others would blame you. Bessy is on Dad's side. Do you think she'll help you? Aware that even if James and the others fell from Grace, she was still inferior to Bessy. Anne couldn't help but feel bitter. She understood that Grace was materialistic. As expected, upon hearing this, Grace paused. She looked down at her phone, originally wanting to know how her uncle wanted to deal with James. But as for whether she should tell James, she was in a dilemma. She was afraid that her uncle would really blame her for making trouble. After thinking for a long time, she still turned off her phone. James had already pulled her name into the blacklist. As for Bessy, she had never once received a call from her. Perhaps Bessy didn't know that she was using her name to obtain a high status in the Perez family.
Is it very dangerous?
Grace glanced at her. Anne glanced at her and sneered. Bessy never once cared about you. You're aware you're only relying on your uncle now. If the Perez family and Gabriel make their moves, do you think Bessy will help you? Grace returned to her room and thought for a long time, but still couldn't find a way to contact James. She didn't need to think further about what Anne said. No, Bessy wouldn't care about her. Bessy had always been stubborn. She had already proclaimed the end of their relationship back in Chicago. Since then, she hadn't seen her once. Even after Bertha's death, she hadn't dared to say a word to Bessy. The next day at the Highline Apartments, Bessy got up early in the morning and prepared to report to the Research Institute. She hadn't been there in a long time. As soon as she got downstairs, she saw Christopher and Alexander sitting at the dining table. Alexander had an impatient personality. He quickly stood up when he saw Bessy.
Miss Miller.
Bessy hesitated. Why are you two back? Alexander glanced speechlessly at Christopher.
They came back from the manor.
Michael came out of the study and helped her get a glass of milk. His mood seemed to be good now, and he lightly said,
"The manor is that person's territory. Back then, the place was convenient to deal with the diamonds, so I put Christopher and Alexander there, but they were both chased out a few days ago."
Fortunately, Christopher was a strict manager. Quite a few people in the manor were convinced by Michael, and only Matthew knew of his connection to the diamonds. However, he couldn't find any evidence. "Are you okay?" Bessy took a sip of milk and frowned.
"Yeah,"
Michael said lightly.
"I'll drop you off at the Research Institute after breakfast."
Michael never hid things from her. She felt reassured to know that he would go to her for help if needed. She was originally going to ask Marvin to bring her today, but didn't refuse Michael's offer. She changed her shoes at the door after breakfast. Michael ate fast and stood beside her waiting. The two went out together. They waited for the elevator. After Bessy put on a coat, she looked up at Michael, whose face was cold, unlike his usual style. Reaching out to hold her hands, Michael calmly intertwined his fingers with hers, and then looked deeply at the elevator door. He had anticipated this day long ago. His biological father regarded him only as a bargaining chip. His adoptive father was behind the murder of his mother and even wanted to abandon him once. He had even given up on himself once before. Like Bessy, he felt like the world was too boring. Thus, he had gone to Chicago to heal his wounds. The only thing he didn't expect was how fast this day came. However, he would face it with much more ease than before, because someone would be beside him every step of the way. Ding! The elevator door opened. He never intended on fighting before, but now? He walked into the elevator, his eyes growing darker.
"I won't go over to Uncle's tonight. Come with me to visit Tucker,"
Michael said as he drove Bessy to the entrance of the Research Institute. Tucker was going to Brandon's, and he didn't know for how long. "I know," Bessy nodded. "I'll let Marvin pick me up at night." At 5 p.m., Bessy and Marvin arrived at the Park Place apartments. In the past, James would be cooking in the kitchen. This time around, Bessy didn't hear the familiar sound of him bustling in the kitchen, but smelled the aroma of stew. Jack wasn't around either. Only Tucker came out to see her. She glanced at Keith and squinted her eyes. "Where's my dad?" Keith's expression remained normal, and he respectfully said,
"James has gone back to handle some matters at the headquarters. He'll be back soon."
Bessy went to the kitchen and took a look. It seemed like James had left in a hurry. She walked out, turned to Marvin and said concisely, "Let's go to the Miller family's headquarters." Episode 469, Famous in the Miller Corporation. Keith was rooted to his spot.
"Miss?"
James had left after answering a phone call. Zeke now held 18% of the shares for the Miller family's headquarters. The situation there had already stabilized. Although Bessy didn't say she wanted to return to the Miller family, because of her current status in Evanston, most of the shareholders and senior executives of the company would more or less have to give her face. Keith didn't know what happened at the headquarters, but he knew that Gabrielle probably wouldn't dare to make trouble.
"Keith, my sister."
Seeing Bessy leave hurriedly, Tucker turned to him. Feeling left out, he couldn't help but purse his lips.
"It's going to be okay."
Keith thought about it and shook his head.
"Gabrielle won't dare to mess around. I'll go and keep an eye on James' suit. Is it time?"
He hurriedly looked at the time on his watch.
"James said I have to turn it off after 20 minutes.
Outside, Bessy asked Marvin to drive to the headquarters. It was close to 7 p.m. and the lights in the headquarters building were still on. Bessy knew that ever since Tucker's injury, James had been working at the headquarters, but she didn't know which floor or office he was in. She stood by the glass door and it opened automatically. She swept her eyes past the place and walked directly to the front desk. Marvin walked with big strides behind her. Knocking on the front desk, Bessy proceeded to ask politely, "Which floor is James Miller on?" At this time, not many people were in the headquarters, and the front desk was also working overtime. Upon hearing this, the person at the front desk looked up and took a long time to respond after staring at her in shock. Bessy was rather famous in the Miller family. The 19th floor," she finally stuttered. "Thank you." Bessy nodded and immediately walked to the elevator. Marvin had already pressed the button, so the elevator door happened to open by the time Bessy walked over. She walked in and waited for the elevator door to close. Through the reflection of the door, her face was visibly indifferent. Although Bessy was unwilling to spend time in mutual deception, it didn't mean she didn't understand it. Michael's identity had been revealed in Evanston, and she had also suffered some setbacks in the research institute. Mr. White and Michael had both asked about James, and it seemed like there might be some problems. After all, trouble was more prevalent than bliss. As long as the Miller Corporation didn't touch Bessy's bottom line, she wouldn't poke her nose into it. After all, such a prestigious family needed its own charter. Other than the time she touched the 18% of the shares because of Tucker's injury, she hadn't interfered in any other affairs. But this time was different. Ding! The elevator door opened. Bessy looked up. The 19th floor was circular. In the middle was a service desk, and most of the office lights were turned off. She walked directly to the largest office on the floor. In the office, James and Jack sat solemnly at the conference table along with many others. James's team, Gabriel, Minister Miller, and the others were all present. Ever since Bessy transferred the shares to Zeke, James had begun participating in the company's projects. At this time, it was a joint venture for the development of a larger-scale starter engine. After the Miller Corporation won the bid, James and Gabriel both had a share of dividends. Although they were both at odds, they still cooperated since the matter involved the Miller Corporation's overall interests. But they didn't expect Gabriel to change his mind all of a sudden. He wanted to take his people out of this joint venture case.
"Gabriel, are you kidding?"
Jack looked at the young woman sitting beside him, and his eyes sank. Ever since Michael's affairs came out, he knew that Gabriel wouldn't be on their side.
"You withdrew your team from the joint venture case. It'll hurt not just the Miller Corporation's interests, but also its fundamental credibility. What were you thinking?"
"No." Gabriel smiled slightly and glanced at Jack and James.
"I have a new joint venture case with Miss Sims. It's a large-scale network security system. As for the engine development, this part was signed by James and you'll naturally be responsible for it."
Gabriel smiled very elegantly and continued.
"Of course, I remember that you've invested $250 million, right? Do you still have enough funds? If not, you can exchange 18% of your shares with me. I won't take advantage of you, and will give you the market rate." "You!"
Once serious, James learned rather quickly and was now knowledgeable about the company's affairs. He tightened his grip around the document. The blue veins on the back of his hand popped up, and his usually honest expression looked like a beast waiting to pounce. Gabriel had already calmed down by this time. Michael's supporters had quietened in Evanston after news of him not being a real Clark family member was revealed.
"Brother, have you thought about it?"
Gabriel smiled slightly.
"You want me to sell the shares to you? Impossible."
James shook his head. Nodding, Gabriel calmly took a sip of tea.
"Okay, we shall see if anyone is willing to work with you on this joint venture case. Jack, do you know how difficult it is to find a team in such a short time?"
With an investment of more than $250 million, how could anyone possibly do charity to this extent? Even if Bessy was close to Rosemary, how could a deep friendship possibly be worth such a splurge? Both James and Jack remained silent, especially James. whose dark pupils were shining brightly under the light above his head. His brain was on overdrive. The worst consequence of borrowing from a bank was that the joint venture case would fail and Zeke would have to auction his 18% shares. He was now weighing the pros and cons. James was still deep in thought. At this moment, the door opened. The sound alarmed everyone inside the office. James was stunned to see Bessy.
"Bessy, why are you here?"
Bessy's name was too well known in the Miller family. Following his voice, everyone looked in the direction of the door. They exchanged glances. Sitting beside Gabriel, Denora also glanced at Bessy. Her eyes fell on Marvin, who was behind her, and her expression changed. She had already known of Marvin's existence. At first, she hadn't been bothered and had thought that he was just Bessy's boyfriend. Who knew that the subsequent incidents would be beyond her expectations? Bessy walked to James's side and sat down in an empty seat. She crossed her legs and glanced past everyone in the office with her chin lifted.
"It's okay.
Continue. I'm just listening." Episode 470. Action. Bessy didn't know what happened. She just glanced at Jack. With such disheartening things happening in the Clark family, Jack originally didn't want Bessy to be involved. Now that she asked, he just breezed past the details and explained it to her. Bessy glanced at Denora and nodded slightly after hearing him. Sitting opposite them, Gabriel's expression changed. Even though Michael was now shot down, Gabriel was still afraid of Bessy. He was still afraid of the White family despite Sherry's support. Furthermore, an outsider had even climbed to the position of the head of the research institute. How could Gabriel possibly underestimate Bessy? Sherry's words rang in his ears. To win or die trying. Gabriel bit the bullet and repeated himself.
"Have you thought about it?"
James took a pen and didn't reply to him immediately. Instead, Bessy knocked on the table. She placed her hand at her mouth and whispered, "Agree to withdraw from the joint venture case." James nodded. He thought so too. Finding a bank loan was also a way out, but there would always be the problem of the 18% equity. James thought for a moment while looking at his brother.
"Okay, our contract ends here."
The two parties canceled the contract very neatly. James's simple and neat response to the problem with Bessy's participation made her uncle doubtful. Gabriel took the contract and squinted at James. He stared at him for a long time before turning to Denora.
"Miss Sims."
Gabriel always felt like Bessy was the biggest uncertainty in this. He hesitated for a moment.
"James is so calm. Something must be wrong."
Denora shook her head and let out a long sigh of relief. She's probably not short of money, but with so much liquidity, even the bank would need time to mobilize it. The most important thing now is that their team needs hardware and software engineers. It's not something that can be resolved with money in a short time. Let's do our project first. Having said this, Denora thought for a moment and turned to Gabriel. We also lack personnel like that. Go and tell the people in the Miller Corporation that no matter which technician it is, you'll accept them as long as they're willing to come over. This method was indeed ruthless. He was pulling the carpet out from under them. Many people would definitely want to come. After all, they all wanted to climb further up the ladder. Furthermore, news of James and his team's shortage of funds would soon spread. Gabriel glanced at Denora and then set about letting the others handle the matter. Outside of the conference room, Bessy was still sitting in the office, turning over the plan while James continued discussing follow-up matters with the head of the Miller Corporation's engineering department. The plan was very thick and included field investigations, funds, and personnel transfer. There were more than 40 pages. Reading 10 lines at a glance, Bessy finished reading it by the time James and the others were done. She understood James's most pressing problem now. Knowledge was the best ammunition. Bessy knew she could easily give them the funds. but it was of little use in the long run. She tapped her fingers on the table, thinking of countermeasures.
Bessy, let's head back.
James reached out and patted her shoulder, frowning.
I don't know if Keith took care of my soup.
He looked rather anxious as he picked up his jacket and returned to the Park Place apartments. James and the others left. Everyone else in the office exchanged glances. James. He was really a little out of touch. They packed their things and left. Unexpectedly, the door opened again. It was Gabriel's confidant. He politely nodded at the others in the office and then conveyed Denora's meaning to them.
Miss Sims said that she hopes everyone will reconsider. We'll welcome you to join our team.
He nodded at them again before leaving. The staff members took a long time to return to their senses. He glanced at Minister Miller and paused.
Minister Miller, this...
Minister Miller left without saying anything. The others lowered their heads and carefully thought over what Gabriel's confidant just said. Back at the Park Place apartments, James went back and whipped up a few more dishes. Although the Miller Corporation was in trouble now, he still appeared very calm. The Miller family had a happy meal.
Michael likes to eat my pork ribs and soup. He didn't come today, so you can bring some back for him.
James had long packed up the food.
It tastes even better than the last time. You have to let him try it.
Bessy personally took the container and looked down at it. Okay, I'll tell him.
I'm afraid I've been a little busy lately.
James wiped his head with a towel and frowned.
I won't have time to see you. You two must take good care of yourselves.
Bessy just quietly listened. She whispered a few words to Tucker and then returned with Marvin. After a round trip from the Miller Corporation, it was already 10 p.m. when they arrived back at the Highline apartments. Marvin didn't accompany Bessy upstairs at this time. He got off the elevator on the next floor. When Bessy returned, the lights in the hall were still on. Michael was waiting for her on the sofa, mindlessly flipping through shows on the muted television. He looked up upon hearing her. Episode 458. You're Not Worthy of Him. Bessy looked down at the local telephone number. She didn't know who it was. Fearing that it was someone from the laboratory, she picked it up. A female voice sounded over the phone, elegant and calm.
Miss Miller, hello, I'm Sherry.
This name was very familiar to Bessy, who had heard it often from Marvin and Harvey. It had also later on appeared frequently at 129. Even Mr. White and Jack also mentioned this name often. She had checked Sherry's data by hand before. It all seemed quite ordinary, perfect, and without any omissions. No one knew better than her that the more perfect the information, the more there was behind it. She had investigated the causes and consequences of the Miller family's decline in Evanston. The Miller family had been one of the 4 major families in Evanston back then. It seemed to be reasonable that it was later on replaced by the Flake family, but... Leaning against her chair and raising an eyebrow calmly, she asked straightforwardly, "What's the matter?"
It's nothing much. I just wanted to meet you.
Sherry's voice still sounded very elegant.
I have something here that might be of interest to you.
Bessy looked down silently. Judging by Marvin and Rosemary's reactions, she had already guessed that Sherry had feelings for Michael. Although Bessy's emotional intelligence wasn't very high, it was so obvious that she naturally guessed it. But she was just surprised. Michael's reputation in Evanston wasn't excellent, and most of the rumors about him were that he was nothing without the Clark family. Sherry was surprisingly prestigious in Evanston, and the two of them couldn't be more polar opposites. In this case, Sherry's reaction was a little too strange. "I'll check it out myself if it's of interest to me." Bessy propped her legs up in disinterest. Sherry didn't seem surprised and still continued elegantly.
What if I say it has something to do with the bombing of Fairfield's laboratory? Miss Miller, if you're interested, I'll wait for you in the Central Cafe tomorrow.
She hung up right after. In the study, Bessy narrowed her eyes slightly.
What's on your mind?
Michael entered the room. Nothing. Bessy looked up and glanced at him. Although she couldn't fully believe Sherry's words, she might really know something about the explosion in the laboratory. No matter what, she was a little interested in what Sherry had to say.
I'm going to Patrick's headquarters tomorrow.
Michael lazily leaned on the chair beside her.
Come with me if you're free.
Bessy nodded, then realized what he had said, and paused for a moment. Okay. The cafe Sherry was talking about wasn't far from Patrick's headquarters. It was on the way. A new message from Samuel popped up on her phone.
Scarlett is with me.
Bessy paused before sending a message to Luke and then asking Samuel the reason. In the Bright family's house, Scarlett was sitting on the bed in the Bright family's guest room. She had taken off her glasses and was looking a little confused at the moment. Her face was pale and drained of blood. Her face behind the glasses was clean and beautiful, and her slender neck looked a little fragile. Samuel hung up the call with Bessy before knocking on the door and entering. Usually loud and carefree, he suddenly paused when he saw her sitting on the bed. Then, he placed the tray on the bedside table and casually said,
Did you fight with the Grant guy? Just tell him clearly if you're not happy with something. Don't bottle it up inside. I don't know much about Jacob, but he seems like a good guy.
He raised his hand and was about to pat Scarlett's shoulder, but turned halfway and touched his earrings awkwardly instead.
Eat your food.
He glanced at her. Scarlett pursed her lips and looked at him. Thank you. Samuel stared at her and smiled.
No worries.
He turned and left. As soon as he closed the door and turned around, he bumped right into his mother. He jumped out of his skin.
What the heck? Mom, why are you snooping around?
Why are you so easily scared? Samuel's mother folded her arms and glanced at him with disdain. Look at you. Don't harm the little girl. Samuel was speechless. Inside, Scarlett was still holding her phone, thinking of Samuel's words. She clicked on Jacob's phone number and called him. He picked up immediately. On the other end, Jacob was extremely anxious. He immediately admitted his wrong and then explained.
Scarlett, I really have nothing to do with her. It was all rumors passed on by the high school alumni.
At that time, Jacob and Thomas had also been high-spirited, and Jacob hadn't denied the rumors. This was why they had become a pair. Scarlett remained silent for a long time and then moved her fingers. I called the police.
Let's just forget about it and pretend it never happened, okay? I was wrong.
Jacob burrowed his head in his arms.
Where are you now?
Scarlett closed her eyes. She didn't want an apology from him. She just said simply, But Jacob, they were the ones in the wrong. She hung up the phone and buried her head in her knees. Her phone rang again. She looked down and saw a phone call from Mrs. Grant. She answered the phone numbly. Scarlett, since you said that you're going to leave my son, please don't come back and disturb him again. Mrs. Grant's voice was condescending and a little bit sarcastic. You should know what level you're on. You're in no way worthy of Jacob. Episode 459. The Perfect Candidate. Hearing this, Scarlett turned to the window stiffly.